Hello, friends. Did you know nearly 80% of those who watch my videos aren't subscribed? If you enjoy these stories, please hit that subscribe button and leave a like. It really helps. Thank you for being here. By the way, where are you watching from? Let me know in the comments. My name is Dalton Hayes, and I've been running graveyard shifts for 23 years straight. Started on the midnight runs when I was 25 years old because that's when the real money is. Night differential pay, less DOT enforcement, better fuel economy, and most importantly, fewer four-wheelers doing stupid things around 80,000 pounds of rolling steel. Now I'm 48, and I couldn't drive days if my life depended on it. The graveyard shift gets in your blood, becomes part of who you are. It changes your DNA, rewires your brain, turns you into a completely different species of human being. Most people don't understand what it's like to live in reverse, sleeping when the rest of the world is awake, working when everyone else is dreaming. Your biological clock gets permanently reset to operate on a 24-hour cycle that's completely opposite to normal society. You eat breakfast at 10 o'clock p.m. while families are putting their kids to bed. You have lunch at 3 o'clock a.m. while the rest of America is in their deepest REM sleep. You eat dinner when the sun's coming up and morning commuters are grabbing their first cup of coffee. Your social life disappears because you can't maintain relationships with people who live in the daylight world. You miss birthdays, holidays, family gatherings, social events. Everything that happens when normal people are awake. Your friends stop inviting you to things because you're never available. Your family learns to celebrate Christmas morning without you because you're somewhere on Interstate 40 in Oklahoma, hauling auto parts from Detroit to Los Angeles. The physical effects are even more dramatic. Your circadian rhythm gets so disrupted that you can't sleep properly, even when you try. You develop what we call graveyard shift insomnia, a condition where your body is exhausted but your brain won't shut down because it's been trained to be alert when it's dark outside. You learn to sleep in truck cabs during the day with aluminum foil taped over the windows to block sunlight, wearing earplugs to muffle the sound of traffic and construction work happening in the normal world around you. Your diet changes completely. You know every 24-hour truck stop from Maine to California, every all-night diner that serves real food instead of microwave garbage, every vending machine location that stocks something edible at 3 o'clock a.m. You develop a sixth sense for finding decent coffee in the middle of nowhere, and you learn to appreciate the simple pleasure of a hot meal prepared by someone who understands that graveyard shift workers are real people with real needs, not just obstacles to be tolerated until the day shift arrives. But most importantly, you develop what I call graveyard shift vision, the ability to see things that daylight people miss completely. Your eyes adapt to darkness in ways that would surprise most people. You can spot a deer on the shoulder from half a mile away. You can identify different types of emergency vehicles by their light patterns before you can hear their sirens. You can tell the difference between fog and smoke, between road construction and accident scenes, between a breakdown and someone who's just pulled over to make a phone call. The graveyard shift is its own world, with its own rules, its own community, its own strange reality that operates parallel to but completely separate from the daylight world. We have our own economy, truck stops that cater specifically to overnight drivers, restaurants that serve breakfast all night long, maintenance shops that stay open 24 hours because they understand that freight doesn't stop moving just because the sun goes down. We have our own communication network, CB Radio Channel 19, which becomes a lifeline connecting drivers across thousands of miles of empty highway. During the day, CB chatter is mostly professional: road conditions, weather reports, enforcement activity, construction zones. But on the graveyard shift, especially in those deep hours between 2 o'clock a.m. and 5 o'clock a.m., the CB radio becomes something different. It becomes a confessional, a support group, a storytelling circle, and sometimes a window into experiences that can't be explained by rational thinking. Graveyard shift drivers share stories that would make daylight people question our sanity. We talk about phantom hitchhikers who disappear from moving vehicles. We discuss radio transmissions that seem to come from empty stretches of highway where no one should be broadcasting. We compare notes about seeing the same mysterious truck at different locations, hundreds of miles apart on the same night. We describe encounters with people who shouldn't be where they are, vehicles that don't follow normal traffic patterns, and situations that defy everything we think we know about how the physical world operates. Most day drivers dismiss these stories as hallucinations brought on by sleep deprivation, caffeine overdose, or psychological problems caused by too much isolation. But graveyard shift drivers know better. We understand that the deep hours reveal layers of reality that daylight keeps hidden. We know that the boundary between the normal world and something else gets thin when most of humanity is unconscious, when the electromagnetic interference from millions of electronic devices drops to its lowest levels, when the highway becomes a river of darkness flowing through landscapes that look like alien planets. The graveyard shift teaches you that America is a completely different country at night. Cities become collections of lights scattered across vast distances. Rural areas become empty voids where you can drive for hours without seeing any sign of human habitation. Mountain passes become treacherous corridors through landscapes that look like the surface of the moon. Desert highways become ribbons of asphalt stretching across infinite emptiness under star-filled skies that make you feel like an ant crawling across the floor of a cathedral. You learn to navigate by landmarks that only exist in darkness, radio towers with blinking red lights, distant city glows on the horizon, truck stops that shine like beacons in the emptiness. You develop an intimate knowledge of America's 24-hour geography, the network of places that stay alive when everything else goes to sleep. You know which rest areas have clean bathrooms and decent security, which truck stops have the best food and the safest parking, which routes avoid urban congestion and construction delays. But you also learn about America's dark geography, the places where bad things happen when no one's watching, the stretches of highway where vehicles disappear without explanation, the locations where even experienced drivers feel uneasy for reasons they can't articulate. Every graveyard shift driver has a mental map of these places, routes we avoid when possible, areas where we make sure our fuel tanks are full and our CB radios are working properly. The graveyard shift creates its own culture, its own unwritten rules, its own code of mutual support and protection. We look out for each other because we understand that when you're alone on a dark highway at 3:00 a.m., the nearest help might be hundreds of miles away. We share real-time information about road conditions, weather hazards, enforcement activity, and mechanical problems. We provide guidance to new drivers who haven't yet learned to navigate the complexities of overnight freight movement. We offer assistance to drivers who find themselves in dangerous or unusual situations. And sometimes we encounter situations that test the limits of what we're willing to believe about the nature of reality itself. What happened to me on October 15th, 2024, was one of those situations. It's the kind of experience that changes how you think about the thin line between the living and the dead, between the past and the present, between what's possible and what's real. It's a story that I've only told to other graveyard shift drivers, because they're the only ones who might understand what I'm talking about. October 15th, 2024. Tuesday night bleeding into Wednesday morning. I was 47 minutes into my shift, running westbound I-70 through central Illinois with a full load of automotive parts from the Ford plant in Dearborn, Michigan, to the assembly facility in Denver, Colorado. Standard graveyard run that I'd done maybe 200 times before. The kind of route you can drive half asleep, where you know every mile marker, every truck stop, every place where the state police like to set up speed traps, every section of road where you need to watch for deer or construction zones. But let me back up and explain what a typical graveyard shift really looks like. because understanding the rhythm and routine is crucial to understanding what made that particular night so unusual. My workday begins at 5 o'clock p.m. with a wake-up routine that's become as automatic as breathing after 23 years of doing the same thing. I wake up in whatever truck stop or rest area where I took my last DOT-mandated 10-hour break. Could be a Flying J in Ohio, a Pilot in Indiana, a TA in Missouri. Location doesn't matter as much as making sure I'm parked somewhere safe, well lit, with clean restroom facilities and access to food and fuel. First thing I do is check my phone for weather conditions along my planned route. Graveyard shift drivers live and die by weather forecasts because conditions can change dramatically overnight, especially during winter months when temperature drops can create ice on bridges and overpasses. I use multiple weather apps and websites, AccuWeather, Weather Underground, NOAA Aviation Weather Center, to get the most accurate picture possible of what I'm going to encounter over the next 600 to 800 miles. Temperature matters because it affects fuel efficiency, tire pressure, and the behavior of my cargo. A 20-degree temperature drop can reduce fuel economy by 15% and cause trailer tires to lose 2-3 psi of pressure. Wind conditions matter because crosswinds can make handling an empty trailer extremely dangerous, and headwinds can add hours to a delivery schedule. Precipitation matters because rain, snow, or ice can reduce visibility, extend stopping distances, and create hazardous driving conditions that might require me to shut down and wait for conditions to improve. After checking weather, I review my route plan using my Garmin truck GPS and compare it to current traffic conditions on Google Maps. Truckers can't use the same routes as four-wheelers. We're restricted by bridge heights, weight limits, hazardous materials regulations, and local ordinances that prohibit commercial vehicles on certain roads. A route that's perfect for a passenger car might be completely illegal or physically impossible for an 80,000-pound tractor-trailer. I pay special attention to construction zones because they're exponentially more dangerous at night. Reduced visibility, lane restrictions, concrete barriers, and construction workers operating heavy equipment create a deadly combination that requires constant vigilance and reduced speeds. I've seen too many accidents in construction zones, too many drivers who didn't adjust their speed or following distance for the changed conditions. By 5:30 p.m., I'm conducting my mandatory pre-trip inspection. This is serious business. 20 minutes of checking lights, brakes, tires, coupling systems, load securement devices, and fluid levels. DOT regulations require this inspection before every shift, and DOT enforcement officers can put you out of service immediately if they find any safety violations during a roadside inspection. I start with exterior lights, headlights, tail lights, brake lights, turn signals, four-way flashers, marker lights, clearance lights. Every single bulb has to be functional because visibility is critical for nighttime driving. I check tire pressure on all 18 wheels using a digital pressure gauge. Steer tires should be at 110 psi, drive tires at 105 psi, trailer tires at 100 psi. Underinflated tires can blow out at highway speeds, creating a catastrophic situation that can kill me and everyone around me. I inspect my fifth wheel coupling to make sure the locking jaws are properly engaged and the release handle is in the locked position. I check my air lines and electrical connections between tractor and trailer. I examine my load securement, chains, straps, and tie-downs that prevent 40,000 pounds of cargo from shifting during transport. I verify that my trailer doors are properly sealed and locked. Inside the cab, I check my seatbelt, adjust mirrors for optimal visibility, make sure my windshield is clean and free of cracks. I test my CB radio, GPS system, and electronic logging device. I organize my paperwork, bill of lading, shipping manifest, permits, insurance certificates, medical examiner's certificate, driver's license, logbook records. By 6:00 p.m., I'm ready to begin my 11-hour driving window. I start my electronic logging device, conduct a final mirror check, release my air brakes, and begin rolling out of my parking spot. The first few minutes of any shift are critical. You're transitioning from stationary rest to highway speeds. Your engine is warming up to operating temperature. Your eyes are adjusting to changing light conditions. The early evening hours of a graveyard shift are deceptive. There's still some daylight left, traffic is moderate, road conditions are generally good. It feels almost like day driving, except you know that everything's going to change dramatically over the next few hours. You're entering a world that most people never experience, a parallel universe that exists alongside but completely separate from the daylight world. As darkness settles over the highway, the transformation begins. Traffic thins out to mostly commercial vehicles, other truckers running graveyard shifts, delivery vans, emergency vehicles, and the occasional four-wheeler on a long-distance trip. The landscape becomes abstract, just shapes and shadows illuminated by your headlights and the occasional glow of distant cities or industrial facilities. Your CB radio becomes more active as other graveyard drivers share information about road conditions, fuel prices, enforcement activity, and general conversation to help pass the long hours. Channel 19 becomes a lifeline connecting you to a community of professional drivers who understand the challenges of moving freight safely across thousands of miles of dark highway. Eastbound driver at the 150 marker, comes a voice through the static. You've got construction starting at the 145 marker, down to one lane, about a 20-minute delay through the work zone. Thanks for the heads up, eastbound. This is westbound, about 15 miles out. How's the flagman situation? Are they keeping traffic moving? Flagmen are professional, doing a good job. But watch for the pilot car. He's running about 40 miles per hour through the work zone, and some four-wheelers are getting impatient and trying to pass. 10-4, much appreciated. Y'all stay safe out there. Same to you, westbound. That's the language of the graveyard shift. Professional drivers sharing real-time information that keeps everyone safe and efficient. We look out for each other because we understand that when something goes wrong at 3:00 a.m. on a remote stretch of highway, help might be hours away. The physical demands of graveyard shift driving are intense in ways that most people don't understand. Your body is fighting its natural circadian rhythm, trying to stay alert and focused when every biological instinct is telling you to sleep. You develop strategies to combat fatigue: caffeinated beverages, protein-rich snacks, temperature control, strategic use of rest breaks. You learn to recognize the early warning signs of fatigue: micro-sleeps that last just a fraction of a second, difficulty focusing on road signs, feeling like you're driving on autopilot. When those symptoms appear, you have to make the difficult decision to shut down and rest, even if it means missing a delivery appointment or losing income. The mental demands are equally challenging. Hours of solitude, minimal human contact, repetitive tasks, and the constant vigilance required to operate heavy machinery safely in traffic. Some drivers handle the isolation better than others. Some guys talk constantly on the CB radio just to hear human voices. Others prefer the silence, using the alone time for meditation, problem-solving, or just existing in a contemplative state. The graveyard shift also has its own geography of services and facilities. Certain truck stops cater specifically to overnight drivers. 24-hour restaurants with full menus, shower facilities that are cleaned and maintained around the clock, laundry rooms, driver lounges with comfortable seating and television. These places become landmarks on your mental map, waypoints where you can refuel, rest, eat, clean up, and connect with other human beings. Flying J, Pilot, TA Travel Centers, Loves. These aren't just truck stops. They're oases of civilization in the vast emptiness of nighttime America. They're places where you can buy a hot meal at 3:00 a.m., take a shower after 10 hours on the road, do a load of laundry while your mandatory rest period counts down. They're social centers where drivers from all over the country cross paths for a few hours before continuing on their individual journeys. The people who work the graveyard shift at these facilities understand what we're going through. They know that the trucker who walks in at 2:30 a.m. looking exhausted and slightly disoriented isn't drunk or mentally unstable. He's just a professional driver who's been fighting his natural sleep cycle for 8 hours to move freight across the country. They provide service with patience and understanding because they recognize that we're all part of the same 24-hour economy that keeps America functioning. Then there are the empty places, stretches of highway where there's nothing for hundreds of miles except darkness, mile markers, and the occasional rest area with basic facilities. Interstate 70 through Kansas is like driving across an ocean of emptiness for 400 miles. Interstate 80 through Nebraska makes you understand why some early settlers went insane crossing the Great Plains. Interstate 40 through the Texas Panhandle gives you a visceral understanding of the word infinity. These empty stretches are where the graveyard shift gets psychological. Hours pass without seeing another human being, without any sign of civilization except the highway itself. Your headlights create a cone of visibility maybe 500 feet ahead, and beyond that is just darkness that could contain anything or nothing. Your mind starts playing tricks on you, shapes that might be deer or might be shadows, lights that appear and disappear, sounds that could be engine noise or something else entirely. This is where graveyard shift drivers start seeing things that shouldn't be there, hearing things that shouldn't be possible, encountering situations that don't have rational explanations. Most of us don't talk about these experiences with day drivers or anyone outside the trucking community because they wouldn't understand, wouldn't believe us, would probably suggest we're suffering from sleep deprivation or psychological problems. But graveyard drivers know better. We know that the deep hours between 2 o'clock a.m. and 5 o'clock a.m. are different from any other time. We know that when most of humanity is unconscious, when the electromagnetic interference from millions of electronic devices drops to its lowest levels, when the highway becomes a river of darkness, flowing through landscapes that look like alien planets, the normal rules don't always apply. We've all heard stories that sound impossible but come from drivers we trust, drivers with decades of experience and spotless safety records. Stories about phantom vehicles that appear and disappear, about voices on the CB radio calling from locations where no one should be broadcasting, about encounters with people who shouldn't be where they are, doing things that don't make sense in the context of normal reality. Most of these stories get shared in the deep hours on Channel 19, when a group of drivers are running the same stretch of highway and someone decides to pass the time by telling about something strange that happened to them years ago. The stories get more elaborate with each telling. Details get added or modified, but the core experience usually remains consistent. Something happened that couldn't be explained by normal logic. Y'all ever hear about the phantom trucker on I-10 through West Texas? Comes a voice through the CB static around 3 o'clock a.m. Which phantom trucker? There's about 6 different stories I've heard over the years. The one with the 70s era Kenworth running without lights, always traveling eastbound around mile marker 285. Oh yeah, I've heard that one. Driver died in an accident back in the 80s, but people still see his truck on the highway. My brother-in-law swears he saw it 3 years ago. Said it passed him doing about 90 miles per hour. No running lights, no license plate. Just a ghost truck flying down the highway. Did he try to raise the driver on the radio? Yeah, but got no response. Just dead air. But here's the weird part. When he checked his logbook the next morning, there was no record of any other traffic in that area at that time. According to the electronic logs, he was the only truck on that stretch of highway for over an hour. These stories serve multiple purposes in graveyard shift culture. They help pass time during long, monotonous drives. They create a sense of shared experience and community among drivers who spend most of their working lives in isolation. They provide a framework for understanding experiences that don't fit into normal categories of explanation. But they also serve as warnings, ways of sharing information about locations or situations that might be dangerous or unusual. Every graveyard shift driver has a mental map of places where strange things happen. Stretches of highway where vehicles disappear, rest areas where people report unusual encounters, sections of road where CB radios malfunction or pick up transmissions that shouldn't exist. We don't necessarily believe all the stories we hear, but we pay attention to them because they might contain useful information disguised as folklore. A story about ghostly voices on the CB radio might actually be describing atmospheric interference that affects radio communications in a particular area. A tale about phantom vehicles might be warning other drivers about visibility problems caused by fog, dust, or unusual lighting conditions. The key to surviving and thriving on the graveyard shift is learning to distinguish between stories that contain useful information and stories that are just entertainment. It's developing the judgment to know when something unusual is potentially dangerous versus just strange. It's maintaining enough skepticism to stay grounded in reality while remaining open to experiences that might not fit into conventional explanations. Which brings me back to October 15th, 2024. And the night that tested everything I thought I knew about the boundary between normal and abnormal, between explainable and inexplicable, between the world of the living and whatever lies beyond it. I was 47 minutes into my shift, rolling westbound on I-70 through central Illinois, when I first heard the transmission that would change my understanding of what's possible on the graveyard shift. It was 11:43 p.m., exactly the time when the highway transitions from late evening traffic to true graveyard shift conditions. Most four-wheelers had reached their destinations or found motels for the night. Most day drivers had completed their shifts and were parked at truck stops for their mandatory rest periods. The highway belonged to us night runners now. Outside, temperature was 42 degrees, according to my dashboard thermometer. No precipitation, clear skies, visibility unlimited. Perfect autumn night for making time. My Peterbilt 389 was running smooth as silk. 565 horsepower Cummins X15 engine, maintaining 1,250 RPM at 67 miles per hour, all systems operating normally. I had 340 miles left to my next fuel stop, 680 miles to my delivery appointment in Denver. The CB radio had been quiet for the past 30 minutes, just the occasional check-in from other drivers and routine information about road conditions. Channel 19 was clear. No interference, no unusual activity. Standard Tuesday night graveyard shift communications. I was listening to satellite radio, classic country station, Johnny Cash singing Ring of Fire, while I watched mile markers counting down in my headlights. Then I heard it. Mayday, mayday, mayday. This is any driver on Interstate 70. I need immediate assistance. My location is mile marker 73 westbound. Please respond if anyone can hear this transmission. The voice cut through the country music like a knife through silence. Clear, professional, urgent, but controlled. Male voice, middle-aged, with the kind of communication discipline you learn in military service or emergency response training. But there was something else underneath the professional tone, a current of fear that he was trying very hard to control. I reached over and turned off the satellite radio, then grabbed my CB microphone. Driver requesting assistance. This is westbound I-70 at mile marker 91. I copy your Mayday call loud and clear. What's your situation and how can I help? Silence. Just the normal background static of an open CB frequency. I tried again. Driver at mile marker 73, this is westbound about 18 miles from your location. Please respond with details of your emergency so I can provide appropriate assistance. Still nothing. I waited 30 seconds, listening carefully to the background static, hoping to hear some indication that the emergency caller was trying to respond but having technical difficulties with his radio. Any driver monitoring Channel 19, did anyone else copy that Mayday call from mile marker 73 westbound I-70? Another driver responded immediately. This is eastbound I-70 at mile marker 105. Handle Roadrunner. I've been monitoring this frequency for the past hour, and I haven't heard any emergency transmissions. Channel's been quiet except for routine traffic reports. That didn't make sense. The Mayday call had been crystal clear. Strong signal. No interference or distortion. I'd heard every word distinctly. Roadrunner, are you absolutely sure? Male voice, very professional, requesting immediate assistance, gave his location as mile marker 73 westbound. Negative westbound. I've got my squelch set properly, volume at maximum, and I've been listening continuously. No emergency calls on this frequency. I checked my CB radio settings. Uneiden PC-78L connected to a Wilson 5000 antenna mounted on my cab roof, properly tuned with SWR below 1.51, putting out maximum legal power of 4 watts. I'd been using the same radio setup for 12 years without any problems. Everything was functioning normally. Roadrunner, just to verify, you're eastbound at mile marker 105 monitoring channel 19 continuously? That's affirmative, westbound. Been listening for over an hour, haven't heard anything unusual. But I knew what I'd heard. The transmission had been local, strong signal strength, definitely not atmospheric interference or long-distance skip propagation. Someone within maybe 20-30 miles of my location had called for help on channel 19, and I was apparently the only driver who'd heard it. I made a decision. Mile marker 73 was about 15 minutes ahead of me at current speed. If someone was really in distress, they needed help immediately. And if there wasn't anyone there, well, at least I'd know I'd done the right thing by responding to what appeared to be an emergency call. I increased my speed from 67 to 73 miles per hour, technically above the posted limit, but still within the range that most enforcement officers ignore for commercial vehicles making good time. The Cummins engine responded smoothly, RPMs climbing to 400 as the turbocharger spooled up to provide additional power. As I approached mile marker 73, I reduced speed and activated my 4-way flashers to alert other traffic that I was conducting some kind of emergency response. I scanned both sides of the highway with my headlights and cab-mounted spotlight, looking for any sign of a disabled vehicle, emergency situation, or person in distress. Nothing. The highway was completely empty. No vehicles on the shoulder, no debris indicating an accident, no emergency flashers, no flares or reflective triangles marking a breakdown. Just empty asphalt disappearing into the darkness ahead and behind me. I pulled onto the shoulder and parked with my 4-ways still flashing. Standard safety protocol when investigating a possible emergency. Make yourself visible to other traffic and position your vehicle to provide maximum protection while you conduct your search. I grabbed my Maglite flashlight and climbed down from the cab. The October air was crisp and still, with that particular smell of autumn in farming country, decomposing leaves, harvest dust, the faint scent of wood smoke from distant farmhouse chimneys. Sound carried clearly in the cold air. I could hear my diesel engine idling, the occasional whoosh of a distant vehicle on the highway, nothing else. I conducted a thorough search of the area around mile marker 73, walking both sides of the highway for a quarter mile in each direction. Used my flashlight to examine the shoulder, the grass beyond the guardrail, looking for any sign that a vehicle had been there recently. Tire tracks, oil stains, broken glass, anything that would indicate an emergency situation. Found nothing. No evidence that any vehicle had stopped or been in distress at this location. The grass beyond the guardrail was undisturbed. No tire tracks or footprints in the soft earth. If someone had called for help from mile marker 73, they'd apparently vanished without leaving any trace. Back in my truck, I tried raising the emergency caller again. Driver, who called Mayday at mile marker 73. This is the westbound driver who responded to your call. I'm at your location and I don't see any sign of emergency or distress. Please advise your current status. Silence. I tried a general broadcast. Any driver on I-70, this is westbound at mile marker 73. I responded to what I believed was an emergency call from this location, but I'm not finding any evidence of a situation requiring assistance. If anyone has information about a possible emergency in this area, please respond. Roadrunner came back on the air. Westbound at mile marker 73. This is eastbound Roadrunner now at about mile marker 85. I still haven't heard any emergency transmissions on this frequency. Are you sure you didn't pick up some kind of interference or skip propagation? Skip propagation is a phenomenon where CB radio signals bounce off atmospheric layers and travel much farther than they normally would, sometimes allowing you to hear transmissions from hundreds or thousands of miles away. But skip signals have a characteristic sound, fading in and out, often distorted, usually accompanied by atmospheric static. The Mayday call I'd heard hadn't had any of those characteristics. It had been local, clear, strong signal with no distortion or fading. Roadrunner, I'm confident in what I heard, but I'm not finding any evidence of an emergency at this location. 10-4 westbound. Might want to have your radio checked when you get to your next stop. Sometimes these things develop intermittent problems that cause them to pick up stray signals. But I knew my radio was working properly. I'd been using it continuously for the past hour with no problems. Other drivers were hearing me clearly, and I was receiving their transmissions with normal signal strength and clarity. I released my air brakes and pulled back onto I-70, continuing westbound toward my destination. But the incident had created an uneasiness that I couldn't shake. In 15 years of graveyard shift driving, I'd encountered unusual situations, strange people, and phenomena that didn't have easy explanations. But I'd never heard an emergency call that apparently no other driver could hear. 22 minutes later, at exactly 12:27 a.m., it happened again. Mayday, mayday, mayday. This is Interstate 70 westbound at mile marker 52. Vehicle fire. Driver trapped. Need immediate medical assistance. Please respond immediately. Same voice, same professional tone, but now with genuine panic underneath the controlled delivery. And mile marker 52 was exactly 21 miles ahead of mile marker 73, about 22 minutes of driving time at highway speed. I grabbed my microphone immediately. Emergency caller at mile marker 52. This is westbound I-70 at mile marker 57. I'm about 5 minutes from your location with fire extinguisher and first aid supplies. What's the nature of your situation? No response. Mile marker 52 emergency. I have fire suppression equipment and medical training. Are you injured? Do you need me to call 911? Silence. I tried calling other drivers. Any traffic on I-70? Did anyone copy that emergency call from mile marker 52? Vehicle fire with driver trapped? 3 different drivers responded within seconds. None of them had heard any emergency transmissions. According to everyone else monitoring Channel 19, the frequency had been completely quiet except for my own transmissions. This is Roadrunner, now eastbound at mile marker 65. I'm still not hearing any emergency calls on this frequency. Westbound driver. You might want to seriously consider having your radio equipment checked. This is Moondog, westbound at mile marker 40. I've been monitoring Channel 19 for the past 2 hours, and I haven't heard anything unusual. What kind of emergency are you responding to? This is Nighthawk, eastbound at mile marker 80. I'm not hearing any Mayday calls either. Are you sure you're not picking up some kind of interference from your own truck's electrical system? But I'd heard it again. Same voice, calling from a location exactly 21 miles west of the previous call, traveling at highway speed, reporting a completely different type of emergency. The pattern was becoming clear, and it was impossible to ignore. I pushed my speed up to 75 miles per hour and activated my 4-way flashers. If someone was really trapped in a burning vehicle at mile marker 52, every second counted. Fire spreads quickly in automotive fuel systems, and carbon monoxide poisoning can be fatal within minutes. 6 minutes later, I was conducting another thorough search around mile marker 52, this time looking specifically for signs of vehicle fire. Burn marks on the asphalt, smoke residue, the smell of burned fuel or rubber. found nothing. The highway was spotless, no evidence that any kind of fire or accident had occurred at this location. I spent 15 minutes searching with my flashlight, checking both sides of the highway, looking beyond the guardrails into the adjacent farmland. If a vehicle had left the roadway and caught fire, there should be tire tracks, broken fence posts, scorched vegetation, something to indicate where it had happened. Nothing. Mile marker 52 showed no signs of any emergency activity whatsoever. This time, I didn't bother trying to raise the emergency caller on the radio. Instead, I called the Illinois State Police on my cell phone to report possible emergency activity on I-70. Illinois State Police, this is Trooper Williams. Trooper Williams, this is a commercial vehicle operator on Interstate 70 westbound. I've been hearing what sound like emergency transmissions on CB radio, but I'm not finding any evidence of actual emergencies when I investigate the reported locations. Can you be more specific about the nature of these transmissions? 2 separate calls about 20 minutes apart, both claiming to be emergencies on I-70 westbound. First call claimed to be at mile marker 73, second call claimed vehicle fire at mile marker 52, but when I checked both locations, I found no evidence of any emergency situations. Are other drivers hearing these transmissions? No, sir. I appear to be the only one receiving them. Sir, we haven't received any reports of emergencies on I-70 tonight. It's possible you're experiencing some kind of radio interference or equipment malfunction. I'd recommend having your CB radio checked at your next stop. 10-4, Trooper. Thank you. But I knew my radio was working properly, and I was starting to understand that whatever was happening wasn't going to be solved by equipment repairs or rational explanations. I resumed my westbound journey, but now I was paying much closer attention to my CB radio. Every transmission, every burst of static, every change in background noise. I was also noting the exact times and locations of the emergency calls, looking for patterns that might help me understand what was happening. 11:43 p.m. Mile marker 73. Request for immediate assistance. 12:27 a.m. Mile marker 52. Vehicle fire, driver trapped. The timing was consistent. 44 minutes between calls. The distance was consistent. 21 miles between reported locations. If the pattern held, the next call would come at approximately 1:11 a.m. from mile marker 31, assuming the emergency caller was traveling westbound at highway speed. I decided to test this hypothesis. Instead of continuing at my normal speed, I slowed down and began timing my arrival at mile marker 31 to coincide with 1:11 a.m. If I was right about the pattern, I might be able to intercept whatever was causing these phantom emergency calls. The landscape around me was pure Illinois farmland, endless fields of harvested corn and soybeans stretching to the horizon, interrupted only by the occasional farmhouse with a yard light or grain elevator silhouetted against the star-filled sky. This is America's agricultural heartland, where the economy still revolves around planting and harvest seasons, where families have been working the same land for generations, where the rhythm of life follows natural cycles that haven't changed much in a century. But at night, especially on the graveyard shift, this landscape becomes something else entirely. The vastness that feels peaceful and productive during daylight becomes empty and slightly menacing in darkness. Mile after mile of nothing but darkness broken by your headlights, with the constant awareness that if something goes wrong out here, help is a long way away. The CB radio remained quiet as I approached mile marker 31. I'd reduced my speed to 62 miles per hour to time my arrival precisely. Other graveyard drivers occasionally checked in with routine transmissions, fuel prices, road conditions, weather updates, but nothing unusual. At exactly 1:11 a.m., as I passed mile marker 31, my CB radio crackled to life. Mayday, mayday, mayday. This is Interstate 70 westbound at mile marker 31. Multiple vehicle accident with injuries. Need immediate medical assistance. Please respond if anyone can hear this. Same voice, but now he sounded exhausted, like he'd been calling for help for hours without response. The professional discipline was still there, but underneath it was a growing desperation that made my skin crawl. I was ready this time. Emergency caller at mile marker 31. This is westbound I-70 at your exact location. I'm right here, and I don't see any accident or emergency situation. Can you see my truck? I have my four-way flashers activated. No response. Mile marker 31 emergency caller. I have a blue Peterbilt with chrome stacks and full LED lighting. I'm directly at the mile marker with all my emergency flashers on. If you can see me, please respond. Silence. I pulled onto the shoulder and activated every light on my truck. Headlights, fog lights, cab lights, marker lights, clearance lights. My Peterbilt was lit up like a Christmas tree, visible for miles in every direction. If there was anyone at mile marker 31 calling for help, they couldn't possibly miss seeing my truck. I grabbed my microphone and tried a different approach. Emergency caller, what's your name? What's your CB handle? This time there was a response, weak, fading in and out like a signal at the edge of its range. This is Wade Turner. Handle is Nighthawk. I've been calling for help for hours. Why can't anyone see me? Wade Turner, Nighthawk. I'd never heard that name or handle before, but something about it sounded familiar in a way I couldn't identify, like a memory from years ago that wouldn't quite surface. Nighthawk, this is Dalton Hayes, handle Road Dog. I can hear you clearly, but I'm not seeing any accident at mile marker 31. What kind of vehicle are you driving? Blue Peterbilt, just like yours. 2003 model with a livestock trailer. I jackknifed about 4 hours ago, went off the roadway, rolled over twice. I'm pinned in the cab, and I think I've got internal injuries. Nighthawk, what's your exact location? I'm at mile marker 31 right now, and I don't see any accident damage or disabled vehicles. I'm about 200 yards south of the mile marker, in a drainage ditch next to the highway. You should be able to see the skid marks where I left the roadway. I grabbed my flashlight and conducted another thorough search of the area around mile marker 31, this time focusing on the areas where a truck might have left the roadway. Used my spotlight to illuminate the drainage ditches on both sides of the highway, looking for any sign of an overturned truck or livestock trailer. Nothing. No skid marks, no damaged guardrails, no broken fence posts, no tire tracks in the grass beyond the pavement. If a tractor trailer had gone off the road at this location, it would have left unmistakable evidence: torn earth, broken vegetation, debris scattered across a wide area. Back in my truck, I tried raising Nighthawk again. Wade, I've searched the entire area around mile marker 31, and I'm not finding any evidence of an accident. Are you sure about your location? I'm sure. Mile marker 31, westbound side, about 200 yards from the highway in a drainage ditch. Big blue Peterbilt with Morrison Trucking painted on the cab doors. Morrison Trucking. That name triggered something in my memory. A flash of recognition that I couldn't quite place. I'd heard that company name before, but I couldn't remember where or when. Nighthawk, what's today's date? Long pause. October 16th, 2003. I was hauling cattle from Kansas City to Denver when I hit that patch of black ice just past the mile marker. My blood went cold. October 16th, 2003. I looked at my dashboard clock, 1:17 a.m., October 16th, 2024. Exactly 21 years difference. Wade, listen to me carefully. It's not 2003. It's 2024, October 16th, 2024. That's impossible. I was just talking to my dispatcher 4 hours ago about my delivery appointment tomorrow morning in Denver. Nighthawk, I need you to think carefully about what happened that night. What's the last thing you remember before the accident? Another long pause, then. I was westbound on I-70, running about 65 miles per hour in the right lane. Weather conditions were good. No precipitation, but the temperature had dropped about 15 degrees since sunset. I hit a patch of black ice that I couldn't see in time. What happened when you hit the ice? Lost traction immediately. Felt the trailer start to slide sideways. I tried to correct, but once you lose it on ice, there's nothing you can do. The whole rig went sideways, then started rolling. I remember the cab windows exploding, the trailer separating from the tractor, then everything went dark. And then I woke up here, pinned in the wreckage, trying to call for help, but nobody seems to be able to see me or hear me. I realized what I was dealing with. Wade Turner had died in a truck accident on October 16, 2003, at mile marker 31 on I-70. For 21 years, his spirit had been trapped at the scene of the accident, calling for help that never came, unable to understand why no one responded to his emergency calls. "Wade, I can hear you. I've been hearing your calls for the past 2 hours." Thank God. I was starting to think I was losing my mind. "Can you call for paramedics? I think I'm hurt pretty bad." How do you tell someone that they've been dead for 21 years? How do you explain to a trapped soul that the help they're calling for can't save them because they're already beyond saving? "Wade, I need to ask you something else. Do you remember what happened after the accident? Do you remember being found, being taken to a hospital?" "No, I remember the crash. I remember waking up in the wreckage, and I remember calling for help. But nobody comes. Nobody stops. It's like I'm invisible." "You're not invisible to me, Wade. I can hear you clearly." "Then why can't you see me? Why can't you find my truck?" "Because it's not 2003 anymore. Because the accident happened 21 years ago, and your truck was removed from the scene a long time ago." Silence on the radio for several minutes. Then, "Are you telling me that I'm dead?" "I think so, Wade. I think you've been calling for help for 21 years. But you're calling from a different time, a different reality. That's impossible." "Is it?" Think about it. Have you seen any other traffic while you've been calling for help? Have you seen the sun rise or set? Have you felt hungry or thirsty? Another long pause. "No. Now that you mention it, time seems strange. Like I'm stuck in the same few hours, calling for help over and over again." "Wade, what do you remember about your life before the accident? Tell me about your family." "My wife Linda and my 2 kids, Jake and Emily. Jake was 14, Emily was 12. We lived in Topeka, Kansas. I'd been driving truck for Morrison Trucking for 8 years, running mainly livestock hauls between Kansas City and Denver." "What were your plans after the Denver delivery?" "I was going to be home for Halloween. Linda was making costumes for the kids, and I'd promised to take them trick-or-treating in our neighborhood. I hadn't been home for Halloween in 3 years because of work schedules." The sadness in his voice was heartbreaking. Wade Turner had died trying to get home to his family for a holiday that was important to his children. He'd been trapped for 21 years at the moment of his death, calling for help, not understanding that he was already beyond help. "Wade, I'm going to try to find out what happened to your family. I'm going to see if I can get word to them somehow. They must be worried sick. Linda's probably called the company, called the police. They'll be looking for me. Wade, it's been 21 years. Your children are adults now. Jake would be 35. Emily would be 33. They've grown up, probably have families of their own." 21 years, he repeated quietly. "I've been trapped here for 21 years." "I think so. But maybe now that someone has finally heard your calls, maybe you can let go. Maybe you can stop calling for help and go home to whatever comes after this life." "I don't know how. I don't know how to stop." "What were you thinking about when the accident happened? What was the last thing on your mind before everything went dark?" "I was thinking about Linda and the kids, about getting home for Halloween, about how excited Emily was going to be when she saw the costume Linda was making for her, a princess dress with real sequins that sparkled in the light. Focus on that, Wade. Focus on your love for your family. Focus on the happiness you felt thinking about being home with them. I can see Emily in that princess costume, twirling around the living room to make the sequins sparkle. I can see Jake trying to act too old for trick-or-treating, but secretly excited about getting candy. Hold on to that image, Wade. Let that be what you carry with you. The CB radio was getting staticky, Wade's voice fading in and out like a signal at extreme range. Road Dog, I want to thank you for listening, for caring enough to respond when I called for help. You don't have to thank me, Wade. Just let go. Go home to your family. Will you do something for me? Will you try to find Linda and the kids? Will you tell them that I'm sorry I never made it home? Tell them that I love them, and I hope they had good lives. I promise, Wade. And Road Dog, if you ever hear someone else calling for help on the CB radio, someone that other drivers can't hear, please respond. Please don't let them call for help alone like I did for 21 years. I will, Wade. I promise. The signal was getting weaker, his voice becoming distant and ethereal. I think I can see something now. A light, maybe. It's warm, and it feels like home. Go toward the light, Wade. Your family is waiting for you. Thank you, Road Dog. Thank you for helping me find my way home. The CB radio went completely silent. Not just quiet. Silent in a way that felt final, complete. Like a door closing on a chapter that had been open for far too long. I sat in my truck at mile marker 31 for another 20 minutes, listening to the empty frequency, hoping Wade might come back on the air to let me know he'd found his peace. But I knew he was gone. After 21 years of calling for help from the wreckage of a fatal accident, Wade Turner had finally been able to let go and move on to whatever comes after this life. The rest of my westbound journey to Denver was quiet, routine, uneventful. The CB radio carried normal graveyard shift chatter, road conditions, fuel prices, weather updates, general conversation between drivers passing the long hours. No more emergency calls, no more voices from the past calling for help that couldn't come. But Wade Turner's story stayed with me. The next morning, after completing my delivery in Denver, I spent several hours on the internet researching Wade Turner, Morrison Trucking, and truck accidents on I-70 in October 2003. What I found confirmed everything Wade had told me. Wade Turner, age 38, of Topeka, Kansas, had died in a single-vehicle accident on October 16, 2003, at mile marker 31 on Interstate 70 in Illinois. He'd been hauling a load of cattle from Kansas City to Denver when his truck hit black ice, jackknifed, and rolled over multiple times. The accident report stated that Turner had been ejected from his vehicle and died instantly from massive traumatic injuries. Morrison Trucking had gone out of business in 2007, 4 years after Wade's death. The company had been a small family-owned operation specializing in livestock transportation throughout the Midwest. It took me several more hours of internet searching to find current information about Wade's family. Linda Turner had remarried in 2008 and now lived in Lawrence, Kansas, about an hour east of Topeka. Jake Turner was 35 years old, married, with 3 children of his own, working as a diesel mechanic in Kansas City. Emily Turner was 33, a pediatric nurse at Children's Mercy Hospital in Kansas City, married with 2 daughters. I found Jake's phone number through social media and called him that afternoon from my truck while I was parked at a rest area outside Denver. Hello, is this Jake Turner, son of Wade Turner? Yes, that's me. Who is this? My name is Dalton Hayes. I'm a truck driver, and I had an unusual experience last night involving your father. Long pause. My father died in a truck accident 21 years ago. I know. That's why I'm calling. I told Jake the entire story. The CB radio calls, the moving locations, the pattern of emergency transmissions, my conversation with Wade about his family and his guilt about not making it home for Halloween. Jake listened without interrupting, though I could hear his breathing getting heavier as I talked. When I finished, Jake was quiet for a long time. "Mr. Hayes, what you're telling me sounds impossible. I know how it sounds. But," Jake's voice was shaking now, "but there are details in your story that we never told anyone. Personal things that only our family knew." "Like what?" "The Halloween costumes. Emily's princess dress with the sequins. Mom spent weeks making that costume by hand, and Emily was so excited about it. Dad had promised to be home to take us trick-or-treating, but he never made it back." "What else?" "The exact words you said he used. Tell them, 'I'm sorry I never made it home.'" Those were the same words he used in a letter he left for us before that trip. He always left letters when he went on long hauls, just in case something happened. In that last letter, he wrote that if he didn't make it home, he wanted us to know he was sorry and that he loved us. Jake was crying now. "Mr. Hayes, my father has been gone for 21 years. We buried him. We grieved for him. We learned to live without him. But every October 16th, on the anniversary of his accident, our family feels unsettled. Like there's something unfinished, something left undone. And this year feels different, peaceful. Like whatever was keeping Dad tied to that accident has finally been resolved." I gave Jake my contact information and told him to call me if he wanted to talk more about his father. Then I called Emily and had a similar conversation. Both of Wade's children confirmed details from our CB radio conversation that they'd never shared publicly. His planned delivery schedule, personal things he'd said to them before leaving on his final trip, family traditions and memories that only they would know. 2 weeks later, I was running another load through Illinois and decided to stop at mile marker 31 on I-70. I wanted to see the location where Wade Turner had died, where he'd been trapped for 21 years calling for help that never came. There was a small roadside memorial there, a white wooden cross with Wade Turner 1965 to 2003 painted in black letters, along with a plastic arrangement of artificial flowers that had weathered several seasons of Illinois weather. Someone, probably family members, still visited the site and maintained the memorial. But more importantly, the area felt peaceful, quiet in a way that suggested whatever restless energy had been there was gone. Wade Turner wasn't calling for help anymore. He'd finally been able to let go of that terrible October night and move on to whatever comes after this life. I parked my truck and walked to the memorial cross, spending a few minutes in silence, thinking about Wade and his family and the 21 years they'd all been affected by his tragic death. Then I placed my own tribute at the base of the cross, a small CB radio antenna that I'd removed from an old truck, along with a note that said, "Your calls for help were finally heard. Rest in peace, Nighthawk." 6 months later, I was running the same route through Illinois when my CB radio crackled with an emergency transmission at 2:15 a.m. near mile marker 184 on I-70. "Mayday, mayday, mayday. This is eastbound I-70 at mile marker 184. Single vehicle accident, driver injured, need immediate assistance." Different voice this time, female, young, scared but trying to maintain composure. The transmission was weak, fading in and out, like a signal at extreme range. I grabbed my microphone immediately. "Emergency caller at mile marker 184. This is westbound I-70 about 15 miles from your location. I copy your Mayday call and I'm responding. What's the nature of your injuries?" No response from other drivers on Channel 19. As with Wade Turner's calls, I appeared to be the only driver hearing this emergency transmission. "Emergency caller, what's your name? I'm a truck driver with first aid training and I'm heading your direction." This is Sarah Mitchell. My car went off the road in the ice storm. I think my leg is broken." "Sarah, what's today's date?" February 8th, 1987. There was a blizzard and I couldn't see the road. I lost control and went into the ditch. 37 years ago, another lost soul, trapped at the moment of their death, calling for help across decades of time. Sarah, I can hear you. I'm coming to help. As I drove toward mile marker 184, I thought about Wade Turner and the promise I'd made to him. That if I ever heard someone else calling for help on the CB radio, someone that other drivers couldn't hear, I would respond. I would make sure they didn't call for help alone. The graveyard shift had taught me that time isn't always linear, that the past sometimes reaches into the present looking for resolution, and that the boundary between the living and the dead is more porous than most people realize. It had also taught me that sometimes the most important thing you can do is simply respond when someone calls for help, even if that call is coming from decades in the past, even if no other driver can hear it, even if everything about the situation defies rational explanation. Sarah Mitchell was calling for help from 1987, just like Wade Turner had been calling from 2003. Both of them were trapped in the worst moments of their lives, unable to understand why no one responded to their emergency calls. But they weren't calling into an empty void anymore. Someone was listening. Someone cared enough to respond. The CB radio crackled again as I approached mile marker 184. Please, if anyone can hear me, I need help. I'm so cold and I can't feel my legs. Sarah, this is Dalton. I can hear you, and I'm almost to your location. You're not alone anymore. Thank God. I've been calling for hours. I thought no one was ever going to answer. I'm answering now, Sarah. Let's get you home. The graveyard shift never ends. The stories never stop. Somewhere on America's highways, at this very moment, someone is calling for help across barriers of time and space and death itself. Most drivers will never hear these calls. Most people will never understand that the deep hours reveal layers of reality that daylight keeps hidden. But for those of us who run the graveyard shift, who live in the liminal space between day and night, between the rational world and whatever lies beyond it, these experiences become part of who we are. We become bridges between the living and the dead, between the past and the present, between voices crying for help and the silence that threatens to swallow them forever. Keep your CB radio on channel 19. Listen carefully in the deep hours between 2 o'clock a.m. and 5 o'clock a.m. And if you hear someone calling for help, someone that other drivers can't hear, please respond. Someone has been waiting a very long time for you to answer. The highway remembers every tragedy, every accident, every moment when someone's life ended far from home. Most of the time, those memories stay buried in asphalt and steel, invisible to the millions of people who drive these roads every day. But on the graveyard shift, when the barriers between worlds grow thin, those memories surface looking for compassion, understanding, and the kind of closure that only comes when someone finally hears their call for help and cares enough to respond. Drive safe out there. Keep your ears open. And remember, just because you can't see someone doesn't mean they're not there, calling for help in the darkness, hoping someone will finally care enough to answer. Name's Brock Castellano, and I've been running graveyard shifts for 17 years straight. Started night driving when I was 29, fresh out of the Army where I'd spent 8 years as a communications specialist and convoy security in Iraq and Afghanistan. Did 3 tours total, 2 in Iraq during the surge, 1 in Afghanistan during drawdown operations. When I got back to civilian life in 2007, everything felt too quiet, too predictable, too safe. The graveyard shift gave me back that edge, that sense of operating in a different world where normal rules don't always apply, and situational awareness means the difference between getting home safe and becoming another casualty statistic. Most people think graveyard shift trucking is just regular trucking done in the dark, But that's like saying night combat is just daytime combat with the lights off. Everything changes when the sun goes down. Your senses sharpen in ways that daylight drivers never experience. Your awareness expands beyond normal human limits. Your instincts take over in ways that feel almost supernatural after years of conditioning. After 17 years of running midnight to noon shifts, I can tell you that the highway becomes a completely different entity after 11 o'clock p.m. It's alive, it's watching, and it's waiting for you to make the kind of mistake that gets people killed. The graveyard shift attracts a specific breed of driver. We're not the family men hauling general freight on predictable schedules with weekends off and regular sleep patterns. We're the ones who couldn't adjust to civilian schedules after military service, the insomniacs who figured out how to make money from our sleep disorders, the loners who prefer the company of CB radio voices to actual human interaction, the adrenaline junkies who need that constant low-level tension that comes with navigating 80,000 pounds of steel and cargo through darkness at 70 miles per hour, while most of America sleeps peacefully in their beds. We develop skills that regular drivers never need. Night vision that borders on the supernatural. I can spot a deer on the shoulder from half a mile away, identify the make and model of oncoming vehicles by their headlight patterns before I can see their grills, read mile markers in my peripheral vision while maintaining focus on road hazards ahead. We learn to interpret CB radio transmissions not just for content, but for emotional subtext, the difference between a driver who's tired and one who's scared, between routine road conditions and something that shouldn't be happening, between professional communication and someone calling for help who can't say so directly. Most importantly, we develop what I call graveyard shift intuition, the ability to sense when something isn't right, even when everything appears normal on the surface. It's a survival instinct that comes from spending thousands of hours alone in environments where help is far away and situations can turn dangerous without warning. In the Army, we called it battlefield awareness, that sixth sense that tells you when an IED is buried in the road ahead, when a building contains hostiles, when a seemingly routine patrol is about to turn into a firefight. In trucking, it's what keeps you alive when regular safety protocols aren't enough. My truck is a 2020 Kenworth W900L, classic long-nose style with a 76-inch sleeper and a 500-horsepower Caterpillar C15 engine that purrs like a kitten when properly maintained. I call her Night Rider because she's built specifically for the graveyard shift. Extra lighting packages, front and rear, that can turn night into day, upgraded CB radio system with dual antennas that can reach out 75 miles on a clear night, auxiliary power units that let me idle electrical systems without running the main engine, thermal curtains that block daylight when I'm sleeping during normal business hours. The exterior is midnight blue with ghost flames painted in silver that only show up under certain lighting conditions. A custom paint job that cost me $8,000 but looks absolutely menacing rolling down a dark highway. Chrome stacks, LED marker lights, custom grille guard, everything you need to announce that this truck means business. She's not the biggest or flashiest rig on the road, but she's built for performance and reliability in conditions where both matter more than comfort. I've got the sleeper set up like a military field operations center. Everything in its place, nothing unnecessary, maximum efficiency and minimum space. Tactical flashlights mounted in quick access positions. First aid kit that could handle anything short of major surgery. Emergency supplies that would let me survive. The cab is equipped with surveillance equipment that most drivers would consider paranoid overkill. Dashboard cameras recording forward and rear views. Side-mounted cameras covering both flanks. Interior camera documenting everything that happens in the cab. Motion sensors. Night vision capability. Digital recording systems that automatically back up to cloud storage. It's the kind of setup you'd use in a combat zone where intelligence gathering might be the difference between mission success and catastrophic failure. People ask me why I'm so heavily equipped for what's supposedly a routine civilian job. The answer is simple. The graveyard shift isn't routine, and it's not entirely civilian. There are places out there where the normal rules don't apply, where predators hunt for isolated victims, where crimes happen that never make it into official reports because the evidence disappears before anyone can investigate. If you're going to survive 17 years of driving through America's dark corners, you better be prepared for whatever you might encounter. The route I was running on November 3rd, 2024, was one I'd done maybe 50 times over the past 3 years. Interstate 80 westbound from Chicago to Salt Lake City, hauling electronics and computer components from a distribution center in Cicero to a tech company warehouse in South Jordan, Utah. Total distance 1,440 miles, which meant about 20 hours of actual driving time spread over 3 days with mandatory DOT rest breaks every 8 hours and 10-hour off-duty periods between shifts. I'd started my shift at 10 o'clock p.m. from a truck stop in Morris, Illinois, about 60 miles southwest of Chicago. The load was standard high-value electronics, smartphones, tablets, laptop computers, worth about $300,000 total and requiring extra security precautions during transport. Cargo theft is a massive problem in the trucking industry, with criminals targeting electronics shipments because they're valuable, portable, and easy to fence through underground markets. November 3rd was a Tuesday, which meant light traffic and good weather conditions for the first segment through Illinois and Iowa. Outside temperature was 38 degrees, clear skies with unlimited visibility, no precipitation in the forecast until I reached the Rocky Mountains 3 days later. Perfect graveyard shift driving conditions. Cold enough to keep me alert, clear enough for maximum visibility, quiet enough to make good time without fighting traffic. The first few hours went exactly as planned. Light traffic on I-80 westbound, mostly other commercial vehicles heading toward Iowa and the western states. CB radio chatter was normal, drivers sharing information about construction zones, fuel prices, weather conditions ahead, the usual professional communication that keeps freight moving safely and efficiently across the country. I made my first fuel stop in Davenport, Iowa, around 1:30 a.m., topped off both tanks and grabbed coffee and a sandwich from the 24-hour deli counter. Interstate 80 through Iowa is notorious among graveyard shift drivers for its mind-numbing monotony. 300 miles of mostly straight highway through agricultural country, where the landscape disappears completely in darkness. During daylight hours, you can see endless fields of corn and soybeans stretching to the horizon, broken by farm buildings and grain elevators that mark the centers of rural communities. At night, it's just darkness punctuated by the occasional yard light or distant glow of a small town that most travelers never visit. This is where the graveyard shift gets psychological. Mile after mile of emptiness that makes you feel like you're the only person left alive in the world. The monotony can be hypnotic in a dangerous way. You start losing track of time, your attention wanders, you begin operating on some kind of unconscious autopilot that can be deadly if you encounter an unexpected situation. Your mind starts playing tricks on you, creating patterns and shapes in the darkness that aren't really there. The isolation affects different drivers differently. Some guys can't handle it. They switch to day driving or get out of trucking entirely. Others adapt by talking constantly on the CB radio, just to hear human voices and maintain some connection to the outside world. A few, like me, learn to embrace the solitude and use it for meditation, problem-solving, or just existing in a contemplative state where time and distance lose their normal meaning. But the isolation also creates opportunities for predators. Criminals who understand that a lone trucker on a dark highway is vulnerable in ways that most people never. Human traffickers who use truck stops as bases for moving their merchandise from one market to another. That's why I always stop at the official rest areas instead of parking at random truck stops or roadside locations. Rest areas are maintained by state DOT agencies. They have adequate lighting and security, they're patrolled regularly by law enforcement, and they're designed specifically for commercial vehicles. There are 3 rest areas on I-80 through Iowa, one near Davenport, one near Grinnell, and one near Council Bluffs. The spacing is perfect for managing your hours of service requirements while maintaining maximum security during mandatory rest breaks. The Grinnell rest area is particularly important strategically because it's located at mile marker 182, exactly halfway across Iowa, perfect timing for a 30-minute break around 4 o'clock a.m. when circadian rhythm crashes make it dangerous to continue driving without a brief rest period. I've been stopping there for years, and it's always been clean, safe, and professionally maintained. The facility itself is typical of Iowa DOT rest areas. Modern buildings with clean restrooms, adequate lighting throughout the parking areas, separate sections for passenger vehicles and commercial trucks, picnic tables, and informational displays about local history and attractions. The truck parking section can accommodate maybe 20 big rigs, with individual spaces marked and numbered for efficient use of available area. What makes this particular rest area notable is its isolation. It's literally in the middle of nowhere. The nearest town is Grinnell, about 8 miles south, and there's no other development visible in any direction. During daylight hours, you can see farmland extending to the horizon in every direction. At night, it's just a small island of electric light surrounded by absolute darkness that stretches for miles in every direction. The isolation creates a sense of vulnerability that most drivers feel but don't talk about. You're completely alone in an environment where help could be hours away if something goes wrong. Your CB radio works, but the nearest commercial traffic might be 50 miles away. Cell phone coverage is spotty because there aren't enough population centers to justify dense tower networks. If someone wanted to commit a crime against a truck driver, this would be an ideal location. Remote, isolated, minimal chance of witnesses or rapid police response. I pulled into the rest area at 4:17 a.m. According to my electronic logbook, exactly on schedule for my planned route timing. There was one other truck already parked in the commercial vehicle section. A white Freightliner Cascadia with a 53-foot dry van trailer positioned in space number 7 near the far end of the parking area. I chose space number 3, about 200 feet away, giving both of us plenty of room and maintaining appropriate tactical spacing in case the situation developed in unexpected ways. The other truck had its marker lights on, indicating the driver was on a legal rest break, but I didn't see any interior lights or movement in the cab. Probably sleeping, which made perfect sense for 4 o'clock a.m. on a Wednesday morning. Most graveyard drivers try to coordinate their mandatory rest breaks with natural sleep cycles, and the early morning hours are when fatigue typically peaks regardless of how much caffeine you've consumed. I've always been respectful of other drivers' rest periods. We all need our sleep to operate safely, and interrupting someone's mandatory break can mess up their entire hours of service schedule for the next several days. But I also maintain situational awareness whenever I'm sharing a rest area with unknown vehicles, especially during the vulnerable hours when most people are asleep and reaction times are slowest. I shut down my main engine and activated my auxiliary power unit to maintain electrical power for lights, heating, and electronic equipment without idling the diesel engine. Updated my logbook to show off-duty/rest break status, then climbed into the sleeper to stretch out on my bunk for the mandatory 30-minute break. I wasn't actually tired enough to sleep. The combination of caffeine and adrenaline was keeping me alert, but I needed to get off the driving line for legal compliance. While I was lying in my sleeper, I could see the other truck through my side window. It was maybe 150 yards away, clearly visible under the rest area lighting. White Freightliner with what appeared to be Michigan license plates, though I couldn't read the numbers from that distance in the darkness. The trailer appeared to be standard dry van configuration, probably hauling general freight like consumer goods or manufactured products. What struck me as unusual was how you pull into an available space, set your air brakes, grab some rest, and get back on the road as quickly as possible. Time is money in the trucking industry, and unnecessary delays cost revenue. But this truck was positioned exactly in the center of the painted parking lines, perfectly parallel to the curb, aligned with mathematical precision that suggested someone had taken extra care to park it properly. It was the kind of positioning you might expect from a driver who was planning to be there for an extended period, a 10-hour rest break or overnight stay, not a quick 30-minute stop. I spent my mandatory break reading trucking industry news on my phone and monitoring CB Radio Channel 19 for traffic information. There was some chatter from drivers about 200 miles west dealing with construction delays near Des Moines and occasional check-ins from eastbound traffic reporting fuel prices and road conditions. But nothing from the other truck at the rest area, which wasn't particularly unusual. Many drivers keep their CB radios off during rest breaks to avoid being disturbed by unnecessary chatter. At 4:47 a.m., I completed my break and prepared to get back on the road. Started my main engine and let it warm up for a minute while I conducted my mandatory post-break vehicle inspection. Checked all exterior lights, walked around the truck to examine tires for damage or unusual wear, verified that my load securement was still properly configured. Everything looked normal, all systems functioning properly. As I was backing out of my parking space, I noticed something that triggered my military-trained situational awareness. The ground around the other truck looked disturbed. Not dramatically, but enough to catch my attention in a way that made me want to investigate further before leaving the area. I stopped my truck and grabbed my tactical flashlight, a Streamlight Pro Tac 2.0 that puts out 2,000 lumens and can illuminate objects clearly at 300 yards. What I saw when I examined the area around the white Freightliner made me immediately uncomfortable in ways I couldn't initially explain. The gravel in the parking area showed tire tracks and footprint patterns that seemed more extensive than you'd expect from a single driver taking a routine rest break. There were multiple sets of tire tracks overlapping in chaotic patterns, like the truck had been maneuvered into position several times before settling in its final location. There were footprints, lots of them, creating traffic patterns that didn't make sense for a solo driver on a standard DOT break. But what really triggered my alarm bells were the drag marks. Clear impressions in the gravel that looked like something heavy had been dragged from the truck toward the wooded area beyond the parking lot. The marks were subtle. You'd have to be looking for them to notice them, and you'd need tactical lighting to see them clearly in darkness. But once I saw them, I couldn't ignore them. My Army training kicked in immediately. When something looks wrong, investigate further before making assumptions. When you're in an isolated location with potential security concerns, gather intelligence systematically before taking action. When you encounter evidence of possible criminal activity, document everything and maintain chain of custody protocols in case law enforcement needs evidence for prosecution. I walked over to the white Freightliner, keeping my flashlight beam low to avoid attracting unnecessary attention if there were hostile actors in the area. The truck was a 2019 Cascadia with Michigan commercial plates registered to Lakeside Transport LLC, according to the DOT registration information visible on the cab doors. The trailer was a standard 53-foot dry van with no special markings except DOT numbers and a placard indicating general freight rather than hazardous materials. The cab was dark, windows tinted enough that I couldn't see inside even with my tactical flashlight. No response when I knocked on the driver's door with sufficient force to wake someone from normal sleep. No sound of movement inside the cab, no indication that anyone was present, no snoring or other signs of human occupancy. But the truck was locked, engine was off, and all marker lights were functioning normally. I walked around to examine the trailer and immediately noticed that the rear doors were slightly ajar, not wide open, but not properly sealed either. Standard security protocol requires trailer doors to be locked and sealed whenever a vehicle is unattended, especially during rest breaks in isolated locations where cargo theft is a constant concern. There was a padlock hanging from the latch mechanism, but it wasn't engaged in the locked position. Using my flashlight, I could see through the gap between the trailer doors into the cargo area. What I saw was completely unexpected. The trailer appeared to be empty. No visible cargo, no load securement equipment, no shipping pallets or containers, nothing but the bare interior walls of an unloaded trailer. That was highly unusual for a truck that was supposedly in the middle of a long-haul run between pickup and delivery locations. Commercial trailers don't travel empty except under very specific circumstances. Returning from a delivery to pick up another load, deadheading to a different market area, or moving equipment between terminals. But an empty trailer wouldn't explain the drag marks, the disturbed gravel patterns, or the unusual parking precision. Something else was happening here that didn't fit normal trucking operations. The drag marks in the gravel led from the rear of the trailer toward a wooded area about 50 yards from the parking lot. The marks were more pronounced near the trailer, suggesting that whatever had been dragged was heavy when it started moving but became lighter or was divided into smaller pieces as it progressed toward the trees. The pattern suggested systematic movement of multiple objects rather than a single large item. I followed the drag marks to the edge of the wooded area, using my flashlight to illuminate the ground ahead while maintaining awareness of my surroundings in case this was some kind of ambush situation. The trail continued into the trees, marked by broken branches, disturbed leaf litter, and occasional depressions in the soft earth where heavy objects had been placed during transport. About 30 yards into the woods, I found what I was looking for and immediately understood that I was dealing with something far more serious than cargo theft or routine criminal activity. A freshly dug grave, approximately 6 feet long, 3 feet wide, 4 feet deep, dimensions that were unmistakably consistent with what you'd dig to bury a human body. The excavated dirt was piled nearby, along with a military surplus folding shovel that looked like standard Army engineering equipment. The hole was currently empty, but the fresh earth and recent digging marks indicated that it had been created within the past few hours. I immediately backed away from the burial site and returned to my truck to call 911. This had escalated far beyond a suspicious vehicle encounter into potential evidence of homicide, kidnapping, or other serious violent crimes. I needed law enforcement on scene immediately, and I needed to secure the area to prevent contamination of what was obviously a crime scene. 911, what's your emergency? This is a commercial vehicle operator at the Interstate 80 rest area near Grinnell, Iowa. I've discovered what appears to be evidence of serious criminal activity, including a freshly dug burial site in the woods behind the commercial parking area. Sir, are you in immediate danger? I don't believe so at this moment, but there's an abandoned truck here that may be connected to whatever happened. I think someone may have been murdered and buried in the woods, though the grave appears to be empty right now. Units are being dispatched to your location immediately. Please remain in your vehicle with doors locked and don't disturb the scene. What's your name and contact information for our responding officers? I provided my details and retreated to my cab with the doors locked, engine running, ready to leave immediately if the situation became dangerous. I also got on my CB radio to alert other westbound drivers about the potential hazard at the Grinnell rest area and recommend they use alternative facilities until the situation was resolved. Break 19. This is Knight Rider at the Grinnell rest area on I-80 westbound. I've got law enforcement responding to a possible crime scene here. Recommend other westbound drivers use the Council Bluffs rest area or private truck stops until the situation is cleared. Knight Rider, this is eastbound Eddie at mile marker 200. What kind of situation are you dealing with? Can't provide specific details while investigation is ongoing, eastbound Eddie, but it's serious enough that I've got multiple 911 units responding. Just recommend avoiding this rest area for the next several hours until law enforcement gives the all clear. 10-4, Knight Rider. Appreciate the heads up. You all stay safe out there and let us know when the area is secure. Will do, eastbound Eddie. Knight Rider clear. Iowa State Police arrived on scene 14 minutes later. 2 patrol units, a detective, and a crime scene investigation team with specialized equipment for processing potential homicide scenes. I provided them with a detailed account of everything I'd observed, showed them the drag marks and burial site, answered their questions about my background and timeline, and turned over copies of my surveillance footage from the cab-mounted cameras. The lead detective, Sergeant Maria Rodriguez, had been with the Iowa State Police for 12 years and specialized in highway crimes, and she told me that rest areas along I-80 had been locations for various criminal activities over the years: drug trafficking, human trafficking, robbery, assault, cargo theft. But this was the first time she'd encountered evidence of a possible homicide with body disposal at this particular location. Mr. Castellano, you did the right thing by calling this in immediately and not disturbing the scene. Based on your description and the evidence we're seeing, this appears to be a serious crime that requires thorough investigation by our crime scene unit. What happens to the other truck? The white Freightliner? We'll impound it as potential evidence and process it for fingerprints, DNA, trace evidence. We'll run the plates and DOT numbers, contact the registered owner, try to determine who was supposed to be driving it and what cargo they were supposed to be hauling. And the burial site? Crime scene unit will process the entire area with ground-penetrating radar, metal detectors, and excavation equipment. If there's a body buried there, or if there was a body that's been moved, we'll find evidence of it. The investigation kept me at the rest area until 9:15 a.m., well into what should have been my mandatory sleep period for the next driving shift. I gave multiple detailed statements, provided contact information for follow-up interviews, and was told I would definitely be called as a witness if they made arrests and the case went to trial. By the time I was released from the scene, I was too wired from adrenaline and caffeine to sleep, so I decided to push through to my next scheduled rest stop in Nebraska and adjust my schedule accordingly. Over the next 4 days, while I completed my delivery to Salt Lake City and started my return trip to Chicago, I followed news reports about the investigation at the Grinnell Rest Area through local media websites and trucking industry news services. What they found during the crime scene processing exceeded my worst expectations about what I'd stumbled into that November morning. The burial site contained human remains, not a complete body, but enough bone fragments, teeth, and DNA evidence to confirm that at least one person had been murdered and buried there within the past month. The victim was identified as Marcus Johnson, age 34, a long-haul truck driver from Detroit who had been reported missing by his wife 6 days earlier when he failed to check in during a scheduled delivery run from Chicago to Denver. Johnson had been hauling a load of consumer electronics worth approximately $280,000 when he disappeared. His truck and trailer had been found abandoned at a truck stop near Council Bluffs, completely empty, with no sign of the driver or cargo. Without my discovery of the burial site and evidence at the Grinnell Rest Area, his murder might never have been solved, and his family would never have known what happened to him. The white Freightliner was registered to Lakeside Transport, LLC, a legitimate trucking company based in Grand Rapids, Michigan, but it had been reported stolen from a truck stop in Indiana 3 weeks prior to my encounter. The theft hadn't been connected to Johnson's disappearance because it occurred in a different state and involved different law enforcement jurisdictions that don't always coordinate effectively on interstate crimes. Crime scene processing of the stolen truck revealed extensive evidence of violent criminal activity. Blood spatters consistent with gunshot wounds, drag marks inside the trailer where a body had been moved, cleaning supplies that had been used to remove evidence, and personal items belonging to Marcus Johnson that confirmed he had been inside the vehicle before his death. The investigation revealed that Johnson had been the victim of a sophisticated highway piracy operation, organized criminals who targeted solo truck drivers during rest breaks, especially on the graveyard shift when there were fewer witnesses and slower police response times. The perpetrators would follow potential victims to isolated rest areas, disable their vehicles or threaten them with weapons, force them to drive to remote locations for cargo transfer, then murder them and dispose of the bodies to eliminate witnesses. Johnson's murder was the culmination of a crime spree that had been ongoing for over 18 months. The criminal organization had been responsible for at least 8 cargo thefts along Interstate 80 between Chicago and Salt Lake City, totaling over $2 million in stolen merchandise. They specifically targeted electronics, pharmaceuticals, and other high-value cargo that could be quickly sold through underground markets. The Iowa State Police arrested 5 suspects over the following 3 weeks, members of an organized crime ring with connections to drug trafficking and money laundering operations in Chicago, Detroit, and Denver. They were linked to Johnson's murder and multiple other cargo theft cases throughout the Midwest. Sergeant Rodriguez told me that my actions had probably saved other drivers' lives by stopping a criminal operation that was becoming increasingly violent and bold in their targeting of trucking industry victims. But the story doesn't end there. Because what happened to me 6 weeks later, when I was running the same route through Iowa, convinced me that some crimes leave marks on the landscape that go beyond what law enforcement can investigate, document, or understand through conventional investigative methods. December 15th, 2024. I was westbound on I-80 again, hauling a different load but following essentially the same schedule and route as my previous trip. I'd deliberately planned my logistics to arrive at the Grinnell rest area around the same time I'd been there 6 weeks earlier, partly because it fit my hours of service requirements, partly because I was curious to see how the crime scene investigation had affected the facility and whether there would be increased security measures. The rest area looked completely normal when I pulled in at 4:23 a.m. The police tape had been removed. The burial site had been filled in and covered with fresh gravel. The parking areas had been cleaned and the painted lines renewed. There was no visible indication of what had happened there, no memorial or marker indicating that a man had been murdered and buried just 50 yards from where commercial trucks parked every night. But something felt wrong from the moment I shut off my engine. Not obviously wrong in a way that I could articulate to law enforcement or document with my surveillance equipment, but wrong in that subtle, instinctive way that sets off alarm bells in your subconscious when you've spent years in dangerous environments where survival depends on reading environmental cues that most people never notice. The lighting seemed dimmer somehow, even though all the fixtures were functioning normally, and my light meter readings showed the same illumination levels as previous visits. The silence felt deeper and more complete, like sound was being absorbed or damp rest rather than carrying normally through the air. The temperature felt colder than my thermometer indicated, and there was a smell in the air, faint but unmistakable, like decomposition or something that had been buried and recently disturbed. I parked in the same space I'd used 6 weeks earlier, number 3, and shut down my engine for the mandatory 30-minute rest break. The commercial truck parking area was completely empty except for my vehicle, which was unusual for a Wednesday night. The Grinnell rest area typically had 3 to 5 trucks parked overnight, but tonight I was completely alone in a way that felt unnatural and potentially dangerous. As I was updating my electronic logbook and preparing to begin my rest period, I noticed vehicle headlights approaching from the east on I-80. A truck, running at highway speed, that appeared to be taking the rest area exit. I watched through my windshield as the vehicle navigated the entrance ramp and drove into the commercial parking area. It was a white Freightliner Cascadia with a 53-foot dry van trailer, the same basic configuration as the stolen truck that had been connected to Marcus Johnson's murder 6 weeks earlier. My military training and graveyard shift experience kicked in immediately. This could be a coincidence, White Freightliners are among the most common commercial vehicles in America, and the Cascadia is one of the most popular models for long-haul operations. But the timing, the location, my heightened awareness from the previous incident, and my instinctive sense that something wasn't right made me extremely cautious about the situation developing in front of me. I grabbed my CB microphone and attempted to make contact with the approaching driver. White Freightliner entering the Grinnell rest area. This is the blue Kenworth already parked in space number 3. You got your ears on? No response. The white truck continued through the parking area without acknowledging my transmission or attempting to communicate. I tried again. Freightliner driver, this is Night Rider on Channel 19. Just making friendly contact with other traffic at the rest area. How's your night going out there? Still no response. The white truck maneuvered through the parking area and stopped in space number 7, exactly the same location where the stolen truck had been parked during the previous incident. The positioning was precise to an almost mathematical degree, perfectly centered within the painted lines, exactly parallel to the curb. I watched through my side window and surveillance monitors as the truck completed its parking procedure. The marker lights came on. No CB radio transmission, no indication that anyone was getting out to use the restroom facilities or conduct a post-driving inspection. The entire sequence felt like a replay of my encounter 6 weeks earlier, but with subtle differences that made it even more unsettling. The truck was positioned with the same impossible precision, but the timing was slightly different. The lack of communication was identical, but the atmospheric conditions, the weird lighting, the unnatural silence, the smell of decomposition, were more pronounced. I decided to conduct surveillance before taking any direct action. Using my night vision binoculars, standard equipment for military veterans who've learned the importance of intelligence gathering in potentially hostile situations, I examined the white truck more carefully from the safety of my own cab. Michigan commercial plates, just like the stolen truck from the previous incident. Same general body configuration and trailer type. Same positioning in the same parking space. The similarities were too numerous and too specific to be explained by coincidence, but there were also differences that didn't fit the pattern of a simple repeat criminal operation. The DOT numbers painted on the cab were different from those of the previously stolen truck. The company name on the driver's door read Northern Logistics instead of Lakeside Transport. The trailer showed normal wear patterns and road dirt accumulation that would be consistent with regular commercial use, not the pristine condition you'd expect from a recently stolen vehicle. After 45 minutes of observation, during which I saw no movement, heard no sounds, and detected no radio transmissions from the other truck, I decided to approach the vehicle and attempt to make direct contact with the driver. If this was a legitimate operator on a routine rest break, I would apologize for disturbing them and return to my own mandatory rest period. If something illegal or dangerous was happening, I needed to gather more intelligence and contact law enforcement. I grabbed my tactical flashlight, portable radio, and cell phone, then approached the white Freightliner cautiously while maintaining awareness of potential escape routes and defensive positions. My military training had taught me to assume that any unidentified vehicle in an isolated location might be hostile until proven otherwise, and the circumstances of this encounter were triggering every survival instinct I'd developed over years of combat operations. As I got closer to the truck, I noticed the same type of disturbed gravel patterns I'd observed during the previous incident. Multiple overlapping tire tracks, extensive footprint patterns that didn't match normal single-driver activity, and what appeared to be drag marks leading from the trailer toward the wooded area behind the parking lot. But these drag marks were fresh. Deep impressions in the loose gravel that couldn't have been there when I'd arrived 30 minutes earlier, because I would have noticed them during my initial security assessment of the area. Someone had been dragging something heavy from the truck toward the woods, and it had happened within the past few minutes while I was conducting surveillance. I knocked on the driver's door of the white truck with sufficient force to wake someone from deep sleep. No response. No sound of movement inside the cab. No indication that anyone was present. I tried my CB radio again, broadcasting on multiple channels to see if the driver was monitoring emergency frequencies. Nothing. I used my flashlight to examine the ground more carefully, following the drag marks toward the tree line while maintaining visual contact with both trucks in case someone approached my vehicle while I was conducting reconnaissance. The trail led directly toward the same area where Marcus Johnson's body had been buried 6 weeks earlier. What I found when I reached the burial site made my blood run cold and confirmed that I was dealing with something that went far beyond normal criminal activity. There was a new hole in the exact same location where the previous grave had been found, excavated, and filled in by law enforcement. Same dimensions as before, approximately 6 feet long, 3 feet wide, 4 feet deep. Freshly dug, with the excavated dirt piled nearby and the same type of military surplus folding shovel lying on the ground next to the hole. The grave was currently empty, but the fresh earth, recent tool marks, and still soft soil indicated that it had been dug within the past hour. Someone had come to this isolated location, recreated the exact burial site from the previous crime, and done so with precision that suggested intimate knowledge of the original investigation. I immediately backed away from the area and returned to my truck to call 911, but as I was walking back toward the parking area, I heard the sound of a diesel engine starting up. The white Freightliner was preparing to leave. I ran the remaining distance to my truck, but by the time I reached the cab and grabbed my keys, the white Freightliner was already pulling out of space number 7. I could see it accelerating through the rest area exit ramp toward I-80 westbound, disappearing into the darkness within seconds. No lights except the required marker lights, no attempt at communication, just a ghost truck vanishing into the night like it had never been there. I called 911 and reported the incident, but this time the response was dramatically different from my experience 6 weeks earlier. The dispatcher seemed skeptical when I described finding another burial site in the exact same location where Marcus Johnson's body had been discovered. The investigating officer who arrived on scene 48 minutes later treated me like a potential psychiatric patient rather than a credible witness to criminal activity. "Mr. Castellano, you're saying you found another freshly dug grave in the same location where the previous victim was buried?" "That's correct, officer. Same dimensions, same depth, same type of tool used for excavation. But this grave was empty. No body, no evidence of recent burial, just the hole itself. And you're saying this happened while another white Freightliner was parked in the same space as the stolen truck from the previous incident?" "Yes, but this was a different truck. Different company, different dot numbers, different license plates." "Did you see anyone digging the hole?" "No, but the drag marks were fresh when I arrived, and the hole wasn't there during my initial security assessment 30 minutes earlier." "Mr. Castellano, is it possible that you're experiencing some psychological effects from witnessing the previous crime scene? Sometimes people who've been through traumatic experiences develop hypervigilance or start seeing patterns that aren't actually present." "Officer, I'm a military veteran with multiple combat deployments and 17 years of professional driving experience. I know the difference between real evidence and psychological projection. That burial site was dug recently, and someone used it for something. The hole is there, I'll grant you that, but there's no evidence that a crime has been committed. No body, no blood evidence, no witnesses except you, and no way to verify your account of the white truck because it left before we arrived." They took my statement and photographed the empty burial site, but I could tell they thought I was either lying for attention or suffering from some kind of mental breakdown. The investigating officer suggested I consider taking time off from driving and perhaps seek counseling to deal with trauma from witnessing the previous homicide scene. I completed my delivery to Salt Lake City, but the experience at the Grinnell rest area haunted me during every mile of the remaining journey. I started researching the history of that location, looking for any information that might explain the strange phenomena I'd witnessed and why it seemed to be escalating rather than ending with the arrest of Marcus Johnson's killers. what I found was deeply disturbing. The Grinnell rest area had been the site of multiple unexplained incidents over the past 15 years. Truck drivers reporting encounters with vehicles that disappeared without explanation. Rest area maintenance workers finding evidence of nocturnal digging activities that couldn't be attributed to animals or legitimate construction projects. Iowa State Police responding to reports of suspicious activity that would be gone by the time officers arrived on scene. Most significantly, there had been at least 12 unsolved missing person cases involving commercial drivers who had last been seen at or near the Grinnell rest area since it opened in 2003. All of them were solo drivers working graveyard shifts. All of them had been hauling high-value cargo, electronics, pharmaceuticals, consumer goods that would be attractive to organized theft rings. All of them had simply vanished without leaving any trace of what had happened to them or where they'd gone. The Marcus Johnson case had been the first time anyone had found actual evidence of what was happening to these missing drivers. But apparently, solving one murder and arresting the perpetrators hadn't ended whatever criminal enterprise was using that location as a hunting ground for isolated truck drivers. I decided to conduct my own investigation. Over the next 2 months, I arranged my route schedules to pass through the Grinnell rest area at various times during graveyard shift hours, documenting patterns of activity and trying to gather evidence. I installed additional surveillance equipment in my truck, military-grade night vision cameras, motion detection systems, digital audio recording devices that could capture sounds from hundreds of yards away, GPS tracking equipment that could document the exact timing and location of any unusual encounters. It was the kind of comprehensive intelligence-gathering setup I'd used during combat operations in Iraq, adapted for civilian law enforcement purposes. What I discovered over dozens of surveillance visits was that the white Freightliner appeared at the rest area exactly every 3 weeks, always between 4:00 a.m. and 4:30 a.m., always parking in space number 7 with the same mathematical precision. The truck's appearance followed a predictable pattern. Sometimes the company markings were different, sometimes the license plates varied, but it was always the same basic configuration and always exhibited the same unexplainable behavior. The sequence was invariable. The truck would arrive, park with impossible precision, remain stationary for exactly 30 minutes with no visible human activity, then leave without any attempt at communication or normal rest area behavior. During the 30-minute period, fresh dig marks would appear in the wooded area, a new hole would be excavated in the same location as previous burial sites, then the truck would disappear into the night like it had never been there. But here's the part that convinced me I was dealing with something far beyond normal criminal activity. The burial sites were always empty when law enforcement investigated them. No bodies, no evidence of decomposition, no indication that anything had actually been buried, despite clear evidence of recent excavation. Yet truck drivers continued to disappear from the area on a schedule that corresponded exactly with the appearances of the phantom white truck. After 3 months of documentation and surveillance, I developed a theory that I've never shared with law enforcement because they would immediately dismiss it as the delusional fantasies of someone suffering from post-traumatic stress disorder. But the evidence supports a conclusion that defies conventional understanding of how the physical world operates. I believe Marcus Johnson's murder created some kind of supernatural imprint on the Grinnell rest area, a paranormal recording that replays the crime over and over again in an endless loop. The white truck I keep observing isn't a physical vehicle operated by living criminals. It's a ghostly manifestation, driven by the spirits of Johnson's killers, eternally reenacting their crime in a futile attempt to achieve some kind of resolution that will never come. The missing drivers aren't being killed by living perpetrators. They're being taken by something that exists in the liminal space between the physical world and whatever dimension contains the consciousness of the dead. Something that feeds on the fear and isolation that are inherent parts of graveyard shift trucking. Something that uses the rest area as a supernatural hunting ground where souls are harvested rather than bodies murdered. I know how that sounds to people who've never experienced the deep strangeness that permeates the graveyard shift. I know it contradicts everything we're supposed to believe about rational, scientific reality. But after 17 years of driving through America's dark corners, I've learned that the midnight hours reveal layers of existence that daylight keeps carefully hidden from normal human perception. The graveyard shift operates according to rules that are different from those governing daytime reality. Time moves differently when most of humanity is unconscious. Space behaves strangely when electromagnetic interference from millions of electronic devices drops to its lowest levels. The boundary between the world of the living and the realm of the dead becomes permeable in ways that most people never have to confront. I've seen phantom vehicles that appear and disappear without leaving physical evidence of their presence. I've heard voices on CB radios calling from locations where no living person should be broadcasting. I've encountered people in truck stops who shouldn't be there, doing things that don't make sense in the context of normal reality, then vanishing before I can figure out who they are or what they want. Most graveyard shift drivers have similar experiences, but we don't talk about them with day drivers or anyone outside the trucking community because they wouldn't understand, wouldn't believe us, would probably recommend psychiatric evaluation and medication for what they diagnose as occupational stress disorder. We know that certain locations, remote rest areas, abandoned truck stops, isolated sections of highway, serve as doorways between dimensions where the normal rules don't apply and impossible things happen on a regular basis. The Grinnell Rest Area is one of these supernatural crossroads, a place where Marcus Johnson's violent death opened a permanent gateway between the world of the living and whatever lies beyond death. The phantom white truck is a manifestation of that gateway, appearing according to some cosmic schedule to collect souls from drivers who are vulnerable enough to be taken. The last time I deliberately stopped at the Grinnell Rest Area was March 8, 2025. I'd arranged to be there at exactly 4:15 a.m. with full surveillance equipment operational, hoping to capture definitive proof of the supernatural activity that I'd been documenting for months. I parked in space number 5 this time, with clear sight lines to space number 7 and multiple escape routes available if the situation became dangerous. My truck was equipped with every piece of monitoring equipment I could legally install: thermal imaging cameras, electromagnetic field detectors, digital audio recorders sensitive enough to pick up whispered conversations at 200 yards, motion sensors calibrated to detect movement invisible to normal vision. The white Freightliner appeared at exactly 4:17 a.m., materializing out of the darkness like it was driving up from some parallel dimension rather than simply approaching on I-80 from the east. It parked in space number 7 with that same impossible precision. Marker lights activated automatically. No sign of human activity in the cab. But this time, I was prepared with equipment sensitive enough to document phenomena that couldn't be detected by normal human senses. What I recorded during the next 30 minutes still gives me nightmares, and has convinced me that some things in this universe operate according to rules that science hasn't discovered yet. The thermal imaging cameras showed the truck doors opening without any visible heat signatures indicating human occupants getting out. The electromagnetic field detectors registered massive spikes in paranormal activity around the vehicle, patterns consistent with what ghost hunters call intelligent haunting. Supernatural phenomena that respond to environmental stimuli and seem to be controlled by conscious entities. The motion sensors detected movement around the truck and toward the wooded area, but the infrared cameras couldn't capture any images of what was causing the movement. Drag marks appeared in the gravel, created by invisible forces pulling invisible cargo toward the burial site. The folding shovel began digging a new hole by itself, operated by hands that couldn't be seen by any spectrum of light my cameras could record. The audio equipment picked up sounds that shouldn't exist. voices speaking in languages I couldn't identify, mechanical noises that didn't correspond to any known type of machinery, what sounded like screaming coming from underground beneath the burial site. The GPS tracking system registered location coordinates that placed the sounds several miles underground, far below any natural cave system or human-made excavation. At exactly 4:47 a.m., the phantom truck drove away. No visible driver, no human figure in the cab, just a white freightliner operating under its own supernatural power, disappearing into the darkness like it had materialized from nowhere and returned to the same non-place. I turned over all my surveillance footage and audio recordings to the Iowa State Police, along with a comprehensive report detailing my observations and theory about supernatural activity at the rest area. They thanked me for my cooperation and forwarded everything to their criminal investigation division, but I could tell they thought I was suffering from some kind of mental breakdown. 3 weeks later, I received a visit from 2 FBI agents who specialized in what they euphemistically called unusual interstate crimes. They reviewed all my evidence, interviewed me for 6 hours, and conducted their own investigation at the Grinnell Rest Area using equipment that was far more sophisticated than anything I could afford. Agent Sarah Mitchell told me that my case was part of a classified federal investigation into anomalous phenomena that seemed to be occurring at multiple locations along America's interstate highway system. Truck drivers, law enforcement officers, and other credible. There appears to be some kind of pattern connecting violent deaths of professional drivers with subsequent paranormal activity at the crime scenes. Are you telling me that the government acknowledges the existence of supernatural phenomena? I'm telling you that we take seriously any reports that might affect the safety and security of American citizens, regardless of whether those reports fit conventional explanations. Your evidence suggests that the Grinnell Rest Area may be dangerous for reasons that go beyond normal criminal activity. What are you going to do about it? We're going to continue monitoring the situation and gathering intelligence, but we're also going to recommend that commercial drivers avoid overnight stops at that location until we understand what's causing these incidents. The FBI's unofficial advisory about the Grinnell Rest Area has been circulated through trucking industry networks, and most graveyard shift drivers now plan their routes to avoid overnight breaks at that location. But drivers continue to disappear from other rest areas along I-80, and similar reports of phantom vehicles and supernatural activity are being documented at locations throughout the interstate system. I've stopped conducting surveillance at the Grinnell Rest Area, but I continue driving the graveyard shift and documenting unusual encounters wherever they occur. I've learned that Marcus Johnson's murder was just one incident in a much larger pattern of supernatural activity that affects the trucking industry in ways that most people never hear about. The graveyard shift has taught me that there are places where the normal rules don't apply, where the boundary between the living and the dead is permeable, where crimes leave permanent scars on the landscape that continue bleeding long after the perpetrators have been arrested or killed. These places serve as hunting grounds for entities that exist in the spaces between dimensions, feeding on the isolation and vulnerability that are inherent parts of professional trucking. If you're a graveyard shift driver, and your route takes you through remote rest areas during the deep hours between midnight and dawn, please be extremely careful about where you stop and what you might encounter. Not every truck you see parked in those isolated locations is operated by someone who's still among the living. Not every hole in the ground is dug by human hands for human purposes. Trust your instincts when something feels wrong, even if you can't articulate exactly what's bothering you. If a location makes you uncomfortable for no rational reason, find somewhere else to take your mandatory rest break. If you see vehicles or people exhibiting behavior that doesn't fit normal patterns, document what you observe but don't approach them directly. And if you encounter a white Freightliner Cascadia parked with mathematical precision in isolated rest areas during the deep hours of the graveyard shift, don't investigate. Don't try to make contact with the driver. Don't assume it's a normal commercial vehicle operated by a living human being. Keep driving until you reach a location with adequate lighting, security, and other people around. Because some parking spaces are reserved for the dead, and they're always looking for company to share their eternal journey to whatever dimension serves as the final destination for souls that can't find peace. The highway remembers every crime, every tragedy, every moment when someone's life was stolen by human evil or supernatural predation. Most of the time, those memories remain buried in asphalt and steel, invisible to the millions of people who drive these roads without ever knowing what happened there before they arrived. But sometimes, especially during the graveyard shift when the barriers between worlds grow thin, those memories take on a life of their own. They create supernatural hunting grounds where the past reaches into the present, looking for new victims, where phantom vehicles operate according to rules that exist outside normal space and time. Drive safe out there. Monitor your CB radio for unusual transmissions. Pay attention to patterns that don't fit normal trucking operations. And remember, not every truck you see on the graveyard shift is hauling cargo between legitimate pickup and delivery locations. Some of them are hauling souls to destinations that don't appear on any map of the physical world. The Grinnell rest area remains open to commercial traffic 24 hours a day, but experienced graveyard shift drivers avoid it whenever possible. Those who don't know about its history continue to stop there during mandatory rest breaks, and some of them never complete their journeys to whatever destinations were programmed into their GPS systems. The phantom white truck continues to appear every 3 weeks, exactly on schedule, continuing its supernatural harvest of souls from drivers who are isolated enough and vulnerable enough to be taken. I still drive the graveyard shift, but I plan my routes carefully to avoid known supernatural hotspots. I maintain extensive surveillance equipment and document everything unusual I encounter. I share information with other drivers through CB radio networks and trucking industry forums, hoping that knowledge and preparation might protect people from entities that hunt in the spaces between the physical world and whatever lies beyond death. My name is Wade Thornton, and I've been running long haul for the better part of 17 years now. Started when I was 22. Fresh out of a dead-end job at a grain elevator in Nebraska, and figured the open road might offer something better than watching corn get processed 8 hours a day. Turns out, I was right about that. Mostly. The pay's decent if you know how to manage your hours and find the right loads, and there's something about crossing state lines with 40 tons of cargo that makes a man feel useful in this world. Important, even. I've hauled everything you can imagine. Electronics from California to the eastern seaboard, auto parts from Detroit to assembly plants down south, grain from the heartland to port cities where it gets loaded onto ships bound for places I'll never see. 15 years of HOS regulations, DOT inspections, weigh stations, and truck stop coffee that could dissolve a quarter if you left it sitting long enough. 15 years of CB chatter on Channel 19, of watching sunrises from behind the wheel somewhere on Interstate 80, of knowing every rest area between Seattle and Miami by the condition of their restrooms and the quality of their vending machines. In all that time, I'd seen my share of strange things. That's just part of the job when you're driving through the loneliest parts of America at 3 in the morning. You see cars broken down in places where cell towers are 50 miles away. You encounter weather that the meteorologists never predicted, and sometimes you meet people who probably shouldn't be walking along the highway in the middle of nowhere. But truckers learn to mind their own business and keep moving. The freight has to get delivered. The logbook has to stay legal, and home is wherever you park your truck for your mandatory 10-hour break. What happened to me in October of last year changed all that. Changed the way I look at empty roads, changed the way I feel about parking in remote rest areas, and sure as hell changed my opinion about whether some loads are worth hauling no matter what they're paying. It started like any other run. a routine delivery of farm equipment from a manufacturer in Iowa to a dealer in eastern Oregon. Good-paying freight, reliable shipper, and a route I'd driven probably 50 times over the years. Should have been as smooth as silk. I picked up the load on a Tuesday morning in Cedar Falls, Iowa. 3 combine harvesters strapped down on a flatbed, destination Pendleton, Oregon. Delivery scheduled for Friday afternoon. The paperwork was clean, the load was legal, and the customer had a reputation for paying their bills on time. Everything about this run looked perfect in my logbook. I'd take Interstate 80 west through Nebraska and into Wyoming, then connect to Interstate 84 through Idaho and into Oregon. Familiar roads, familiar truck stops, familiar routine. The first day of driving was exactly what I expected. Made good time across Nebraska, stopped at the Flying J in Grand Island for fuel and a shower, grabbed a burger at the Iron Skillet, and checked my load securement before pushing west toward the Wyoming border. The weather was clear, traffic was light, and my Peterbilt was running like a Swiss watch. Sometimes this job is exactly what it's supposed to be. Just you, the road, and the steady rhythm of diesel engine pulling a load towards someone who needs what you're carrying. I crossed into Wyoming around sunset, that golden hour when the landscape looks like something out of a Western movie. Rolling plains stretched out on both sides of Interstate 80, broken up by the occasional ranch or grain elevator. The kind of country where you can see weather systems approaching from 30 miles away, where the horizon seems to go on forever, and where the nearest neighbor might be 10 miles down a gravel road. It's beautiful in its own way, but it's also the kind of empty that reminds you how alone you really are out here. As darkness fell, I started looking for a place to shut down for my mandatory 10-hour break. I had about an hour left on my 14-hour driving window, but I preferred to find parking early rather than risk running out of legal driving time in the middle of nowhere. Wyoming has plenty of rest areas along I-80, most of them decent enough for overnight parking, and I had a few favorites where I knew I could get a good night's sleep without being disturbed by lot lizards or amateur mechanics working on broken-down cars until 3 in the morning. That's when I saw the sign for the rest area at mile marker 247, about 20 miles east of Laramie. I'd stopped there before. A typical Wyoming rest area with a few picnic tables, clean restrooms, and a parking area large enough for maybe 8 or 10 trucks. Nothing fancy, but it was well maintained and usually quiet. The kind of place where you could shut down for the night without worrying about someone knocking on your door trying to sell you something, or borrow your tools. I pulled off the interstate and immediately noticed another truck already parked in the rest area. A red Kenworth conventional pulling what looked like a refrigerated trailer. The driver had backed into a spot at the far end of the parking area, away from the restroom building and the picnic areas. Standard parking for someone planning to sleep in their cab. The truck's marker lights were on, indicating the driver was probably settled in for the night, and a soft glow from the sleeper berth windows suggested someone was inside, maybe watching TV or catching up on paperwork. I found a good spot about 3 spaces down from the Kenworth, close enough to be neighborly but far enough away to respect the other driver's privacy. That's truck stop etiquette. You acknowledge other drivers with a wave or a nod, but you don't crowd them unless they're obviously in need of assistance. After 15 years of this life, you learn to read the subtle signals that tell you when someone wants company and when they just want to be left alone. As I was setting up my truck for the night, adjusting my sleeper berth, organizing my paperwork, and checking tomorrow's route, I noticed the other driver climb down from his cab. Even in the dim light from the rest area's few lampposts, I could see he was a big guy, probably in his 50s, wearing the standard uniform of jeans and a flannel shirt that most of us long haulers prefer. He walked around his truck with a flashlight, checking his load securement and doing what looked like a thorough pre-trip inspection. Nothing unusual about that. Plenty of drivers use their break time to inspect their equipment, especially when they're hauling high-value cargo or heading into mountain grades where mechanical problems can turn dangerous quickly. But something about the way he moved caught my attention. He was methodical, almost obsessive, checking every strap, every bungee cord, and every piece of hardware with the kind of attention to detail that suggested either extreme professionalism or extreme paranoia. I was about to settle into my bunk when I heard him fire up his engine. The rumble of a big Cummins diesel echoed across the rest area, and I figured he was either warming up his truck for the night or maybe moving to a different parking spot. But instead of repositioning his truck, he pulled out of the rest area and headed back toward the interstate. His taillights disappeared as he merged onto westbound I-80, leaving me alone in the rest area. That struck me as odd. Most drivers don't abandon a good parking spot late at night unless there's an emergency or a sudden change in their delivery schedule. And if he'd received new instructions, he probably would have spent some time on his phone or CB radio coordinating with his dispatcher. Instead, he'd just done his inspection and left without any apparent reason. But then again, this business is full of last-minute changes and urgent deliveries, so I didn't think much more about it. I settled into my bunk and tried to get some sleep. The rest area was quiet except for the occasional car or RV passing through, and the Wyoming wind that never seems to stop blowing across the plains. I've learned to sleep through most road noise over the years, but there's something about the absolute silence of remote rest areas that can be either peaceful or unsettling, depending on your frame of mind. That night, it felt peaceful enough. I woke up around 6:30 in the morning, which is typical for me when I'm running solo. Give me time to grab some coffee, check my equipment, and get back on the road by 8 o'clock to make the most of my driving hours. The sun was just starting to come up over the eastern horizon, painting the Wyoming sky in shades of pink and orange that reminded me why I'd chosen this life in the first place. That's when I noticed the red Kenworth was back. The truck was parked in the exact same spot where I'd seen it the night before, positioned the same way, with the same soft glow coming from the sleeper berth windows. At first, I assumed the driver had completed whatever urgent run had called him away during the night and returned to finish his break. Maybe he'd had a delivery appointment that required night driving, or maybe he'd received a message about a family emergency that turned out to be a false alarm. Drivers sometimes have to make sudden changes to their plans for reasons that have nothing to do with freight or schedules. But as I walked toward the restroom building to start my morning routine, something about the Kenworth bothered me. It looked exactly the same as it had the night before. Same position, same lighting, even the same casual arrangement of items visible through the side windows. After 17 years of truck driving, you develop an eye for details. And this felt wrong somehow, like looking at a photograph instead of a real truck with a real person inside. I decided to walk over and check on the driver. Professional courtesy, nothing more. Sometimes people have medical emergencies or mechanical problems that aren't immediately obvious, and truck drivers generally look out for each other. We might be independent contractors competing for the same loads, but we're also part of a community that understands the unique challenges and dangers of life on the road. As I approached the Kenworth, I called out a friendly greeting. "Morning. Everything all right over here?" No response from inside the truck, which wasn't necessarily unusual. Some drivers are heavy sleepers, and the sound insulation in modern sleeper berths is pretty good. I knocked on the passenger side door, loud enough to wake someone, but not so loud as to be obnoxious. "Hey driver, just checking to make sure you're okay." Still no response. The truck was running. I could hear the engine idling and feel the vibration through the ground. But there was no sign of movement inside the cab. No shadows moving past the windows, no sound of someone stirring in the bunk, no indication that anyone had heard my knocks or calls. The sleeper berth windows were tinted, but I should have been able to see some evidence of occupancy if someone was actually inside. That's when I noticed something that made my stomach drop. The driver's side door was slightly ajar, open just enough to prevent the interior lights from coming on, but not enough to be immediately obvious from a distance. A professional driver would never leave his door unsecured while sleeping in a remote location. Never. That's asking for trouble of the worst kind. I walked around to the driver's side of the truck, calling out as I went. "Driver, I'm coming around to check on you. Just want to make sure everything's all right." When I reached the door, I could see that it was indeed open, hanging loose on its hinges with the interior dark and apparently empty. The driver's seat was vacant, the bunk was empty, and there was no sign that anyone had been in the truck recently. But the engine was running. The heater was on. The CB radio was crackling with early morning chatter from other drivers starting their days. All the truck's systems were functioning normally, as if someone had just stepped outside for a moment and would be back any second. Except there was no one around, and there was no indication of where the driver might have gone. I checked the immediate area around the truck, thinking maybe the driver was doing a walk-around inspection or had stepped into the woods to answer a call of nature. But there was no one visible in any direction, and shouting his name, or what I assumed might be his name, produced no response. The rest area was completely empty except for my truck and the abandoned Kenworth. That's when I noticed the tire tracks. Leading away from the Kenworth's parking spot, clearly visible in the damp soil beside the asphalt, were tire tracks that continued past the edge of the parking area and into the grass beyond. But these weren't the wide, heavy tracks you'd expect from a semi-truck. They were narrower, more like the tracks from a pickup truck or a large SUV, and they led away from the rest area in a direction that made no sense. Not toward the interstate access road, not toward any of the service roads or maintenance paths, but straight across the open prairie toward the north. I followed the tracks for maybe 50 yards until they disappeared into rocky ground where the soil was too hard to hold impressions. But in that 50 yards, the tracks told a strange story. They didn't wander or curve the way you'd expect if someone was driving across unfamiliar terrain in the dark. Instead, they headed in a perfectly straight line toward the north, as if the driver knew exactly where they were going and had traveled that route before. But there was nothing to the north except empty Wyoming rangeland. No roads, no buildings, no reason for anyone to drive across open country in the middle of the night. The nearest ranch was probably 10 miles away, and there were no mining operations or oil wells in that direction. Just empty prairie that stretched to the horizon, broken only by the occasional creek bed or stand of cottonwood trees. I walked back to the Kenworth and tried to find some clue about what had happened to its driver. The truck's registration papers, which should have been in the door pocket or on the visor, were missing. The logbook was gone too, along with any other paperwork that might have identified the driver or his cargo. Even the usual personal items that every trucker carries, coffee cups, sunglasses, maps, CB radio handles, were nowhere to be seen. It was as if someone had deliberately stripped the truck of anything that could provide identification. But the cargo was still there. The refrigerated trailer was running, maintaining its temperature setting, and the rear doors were locked with a standard seal that appeared to be intact. Whatever the driver had been hauling was still secure, still being preserved at the proper temperature, still waiting to be delivered to its destination. The trailer's paperwork should have been in the tractor unit, but like everything else that might have identified the driver, it was missing. I tried the CB radio, tuning to channel 19 and several of the local channels that Wyoming truckers commonly used. "This is driver Wade Thornton at the rest area mile marker 247 on I-80 eastbound. Looking for the driver of a red Kenworth that's parked here with no operator in sight. Anyone know anything about this truck or seen the driver?" I repeated the call several times, but got no response except for the usual morning chatter from drivers heading to various destinations across the region. That's when I decided to call the Wyoming State Police. This was clearly an unusual situation that required law enforcement attention. A commercial vehicle abandoned at a rest area with its engine running and cargo intact, but no driver in sight and tire tracks leading into empty rangeland. This had all the hallmarks of either a medical emergency, criminal activity, or some kind of accident that I wasn't qualified to investigate on my own. The dispatcher was professional and took down all the details: location, description of the truck and trailer, the missing driver, and the strange tire tracks. She promised to send a trooper to investigate and advised me to stay at the rest area until law enforcement arrived. I agreed, partly because it seemed like the right thing to do, but also because I was genuinely concerned about what might have happened to a fellow trucker. While I waited for the state trooper to arrive, I did my own investigation of the area. The more I looked around, the stranger the situation became. The tire tracks leading away from the rest area were clearly visible for about 50 yards, as I'd noted earlier. But what I hadn't noticed initially was that there were no corresponding tracks leading into the rest area. The tracks only went one direction, away from the Kenworth and toward the empty prairie to the north. That made no sense. If someone had driven a vehicle to the rest area to pick up the truck driver, there should have been tracks showing where that vehicle had come from. Every vehicle leaves tracks when it arrives and when it departs, especially on the damp ground beside a paved parking area. But these tracks appeared to start at the Kenworth and simply vanish into the distance, as if the vehicle that made them had materialized beside the truck and then driven away across the prairie. I also noticed something else unusual about the Kenworth itself. Despite having been parked at the rest area for what must have been at least 8 hours, there was no moisture on the windshield or windows. In Wyoming, even in October, you get dew formation on vehicles that sit outside overnight. But the Kenworth's glass was completely dry, as if it had only recently been driven or had been kept in some kind of enclosed area where moisture couldn't accumulate. The Wyoming State Trooper arrived about 45 minutes after I'd called, and he immediately understood that this was an unusual situation. Trooper Dalton Reed had been working this stretch of I-80 for over 12 years, and he'd seen plenty of abandoned vehicles, medical emergencies, and even some criminal activity involving commercial trucks. But he admitted that he'd never encountered a situation quite like this one. Trooper Reed conducted his own examination of the Kenworth and the surrounding area, taking photographs and measurements of the tire tracks. He tried to access the truck's electronic logs through the onboard computer system, but discovered that all the data had been erased. Not just deleted or cleared in the normal way, but completely wiped, as if someone had used professional data destruction software to eliminate any trace of the truck's recent activities. "This is deliberate," Trooper Reed told me as he documented the scene. "Someone wanted to make sure we couldn't trace this truck's movements or identify its driver. The question is whether it was the driver himself or someone else who cleaned out all the identifying information." The trooper also confirmed my observation about the tire tracks. They clearly led away from the rest area toward the north, but there were no corresponding tracks indicating how the mystery vehicle had arrived at the scene. "It's like something just appeared here, picked up your missing driver, and then drove off across the prairie," he said. "But that's impossible. Every vehicle leaves tracks when it arrives, especially on this kind of ground." Trooper Reed ran the Kenworth's VIN through the state database and discovered something even more disturbing. The truck had been reported stolen 3 weeks earlier from a truck stop in Omaha, Nebraska. But according to the theft report, it had been recovered by local police 2 days later and returned to its owner, a small trucking company based in Des Moines, Iowa. The owner of the trucking company had signed papers confirming that the truck had been returned and that no charges would be filed. "But if this truck was recovered and returned to its owner 3 weeks ago," Trooper Reed said, "then what's it doing here now, and who was driving it?" He called the Des Moines Trucking Company and spoke directly with the owner, a man named Clayton Blackwood, who had operated a small fleet of 5 trucks for over 20 years. Blackwood confirmed that the red Kenworth had been stolen from Omaha and recovered, but he also provided information that made the situation even more mysterious. "That truck was totaled in an accident 2 days after we got it back from the police," Blackwood told Trooper Reed over the phone. "Driver fell asleep at the wheel and rolled it on a curve outside of Council Bluffs. The truck was completely destroyed, Cab crushed, frame twisted, total loss. We scrapped it for parts and collected the insurance money. That VIN shouldn't match any operational vehicle. Trooper Reed asked Blackwood to fax over the accident report and insurance settlement papers, which arrived within an hour. The documentation clearly showed that the red Kenworth with that specific VIN had been destroyed in a rollover accident and subsequently scrapped for salvage. The truck I was looking at, running smoothly with its engine idling and its refrigeration unit operating normally, should not have existed. "This is getting weird," Trooper Reed admitted as he studied the paperwork. "Either someone has rebuilt this truck using parts from the salvage yard and is using stolen VIN numbers, or we're dealing with something that doesn't make sense from any normal perspective." The investigation continued throughout the morning. Trooper Reed called in additional resources, including a K-9 unit to search for any trace of the missing driver, and a detective specializing in commercial vehicle theft. The dog was able to follow a scent trail for about 30 yards away from the Kenworth before losing it completely, as if the person being tracked had simply vanished from existence. The theft specialist, Detective Shane Morrison, had seen plenty of elaborate truck theft operations during his 15 years with the Wyoming State Police. But he was puzzled by several aspects of this case. If someone stole this truck and was using it for freight theft or drug smuggling, they wouldn't abandon it at a rest area with the cargo intact and the engine running, he explained. And if the driver had a medical emergency or was the victim of a crime, there would be some evidence. Blood, signs of a struggle, personal items scattered around. This scene is too clean, too deliberately stripped of information. Detective Morrison also pointed out another disturbing detail that I hadn't noticed. "Look at the fuel gauge," he said, pointing to the instrument cluster in the Kenworth's cab. "It shows completely full, but according to the trip odometer, this truck has traveled over 400 miles since its last fuel stop. A truck this size should have burned at least 60 gallons of diesel covering that distance, but the fuel level hasn't changed." He was right. The fuel gauge showed the tanks were full, but basic mathematics indicated that the truck should have consumed a significant amount of diesel during its recent travels. Either someone had topped off the tanks very recently, or the fuel gauge was malfunctioning in a way that made it impossible to determine how long the truck had been at the rest area. By early afternoon, the investigation had reached a point where law enforcement needed to impound the truck and trailer for a more thorough examination. A tow truck was called to transport the Kenworth to the State Police impound facility in Cheyenne, where forensic technicians could process it for evidence and attempt to determine what had happened to its driver. But when the tow truck operator attempted to load the Kenworth, he encountered a problem that added another layer of mystery to the situation. Despite appearing to be in perfect working condition, the truck would not shift into gear. The engine ran smoothly, all the electrical systems functioned normally, but the transmission remained locked in neutral no matter what the operator tried. "I've been towing trucks for 22 years, the operator told Detective Morrison. "I've never seen a transmission that acts like this. It's like the truck doesn't want to be moved, like it's somehow anchored to this exact spot." Eventually, the tow truck operator was able to winch the Kenworth onto his trailer using the emergency bypass procedures that commercial tow trucks carry for dealing with completely disabled vehicles. But even then, the process was unusually difficult, as if the truck was somehow resisting being moved from its position in the rest area. As the impounded truck was being transported to Cheyenne, Trooper Reed took my contact information and asked me to stay available in case they needed additional information about what I'd witnessed. He also gave me his card and asked me to call immediately if I encountered anything else unusual during my travels through Wyoming. "Cases like this don't usually get resolved quickly," he told me, "but I'll keep you informed about what we find during the forensic examination. You might be the last person who saw this driver alive, and your testimony could be important if this turns into a criminal investigation." I thanked Trooper Reed for his professionalism and headed back to my own truck to continue my delivery to Oregon. but as I prepared to leave the rest area, I took one last look at the spot where the red Kenworth had been parked. The tire tracks leading north across the prairie were still clearly visible, pointing toward empty rangeland where no roads existed and no rational explanation could account for where they led. As I drove west toward Laramie, I couldn't shake the feeling that I'd witnessed something that challenged my understanding of how the world works. In 17 years of trucking, I'd seen plenty of unusual situations and met my share of strange people, but I'd never encountered anything that felt so completely divorced from normal reality. The rest of my trip to Oregon was routine. I delivered the farm equipment on schedule, collected my pay, and picked up a backhaul load of lumber destined for a building supply company in Kansas. Standard freight, familiar routes, normal truck stop conversations about fuel prices and weather conditions. Everything was exactly as it should be in the predictable world of long-haul trucking. But 3 days later, while I was driving eastbound through Nebraska on my way home, I received a call from Detective Morrison that changed everything I thought I knew about what had happened at mile marker 247. "Wade, I need to ask you some questions about what you saw at that rest area," Detective Morrison said. "The forensic examination of the Kenworth has turned up some things that don't make sense, and your testimony might be the key to understanding what really happened." He explained that the forensic technicians had found evidence that contradicted the basic facts of the case. According to the physical evidence inside the truck, no one has been in that cab for at least 6 months. The dust patterns, the condition of the seats, the lack of DNA traces, everything suggests that truck has been sitting empty for an extended period of time. That was impossible. I'd clearly seen the driver the night before, walking around the truck with a flashlight, checking his equipment. I'd seen lights in the sleeper berth windows, heard the engine start up when he'd driven away around midnight, and witnessed his return sometime before dawn. There had definitely been someone operating that truck. "There's something else," Detective Morrison continued. "We contacted the shipper and receiver for the load that was supposed to be in that refrigerated trailer. The cargo was delivered to its destination in Denver 2 weeks ago by a completely different driver using a different truck. According to all the shipping records, that load never existed. The refrigerated trailer had contained nothing but empty pallets and packing materials. There was no freight, no cargo requiring temperature control, no reason for the refrigeration unit to be running. Someone had gone to considerable trouble to create the appearance of a normal commercial load while actually hauling nothing but empty space." Detective Morrison's investigation had also revealed additional details about the truck's history that made the situation even more mysterious. "We contacted the salvage yard that was supposed to have scrapped this Kenworth after the rollover accident," he said. "They have no record of receiving the vehicle, and their records show that the VIN was never processed through their facility. The insurance company that had supposedly paid out the total loss claim also had no record of the transaction. According to their files, the red Kenworth had never been involved in an accident, never been reported as a total loss, and never been the subject of any insurance claim. The paperwork that Trooper Reed had received from the trucking company owner appeared to be sophisticated forgeries. It's like someone created an entire fictional history for this truck," Detective Morrison explained. "The theft report, the recovery, the accident, the insurance claim, none of it actually happened, but the documents are so convincing that they fooled our initial investigation." When Detective Morrison attempted to recontact Clayton Blackwood, the supposed owner of the trucking company in Des Moines, he discovered that no such person existed. The phone number led to a prepaid cellular account that had been deactivated immediately after the call. The trucking company address was a vacant office building that had been empty for over a year. Someone went to extraordinary lengths to create a false identity and a fictitious business just to provide cover for this truck, Detective Morrison said. "The question is why? What was the purpose of parking an empty truck at a remote rest area and creating an elaborate cover story to explain its presence there?" The investigation had reached a dead end. Despite extensive forensic examination, canine searches, and document analysis, law enforcement had found no trace of the mysterious driver or any explanation for what had happened at the rest area. The tire tracks leading north across the prairie had been photographed and measured, but they led nowhere and provided no clues about who had made them or where they had gone. Detective Morrison asked me to provide a detailed written statement about everything I'd observed, including the driver's appearance, behavior, and movements. He was particularly interested in my description of the driver doing a pre-trip inspection before leaving the rest area around midnight. "You're the only witness we have," he told me. "Whatever you saw that night might be the only real evidence we have about what actually happened at mile marker 247. I provided the written statement as requested, but I also began conducting my own informal investigation. Over the following weeks, I made a point of stopping at truck stops and rest areas throughout the region, asking other drivers if they'd heard anything about unusual incidents or missing truckers. The transportation industry is a close community, and news about strange occurrences spreads quickly through CB radio networks and online forums. What I learned from those conversations was deeply disturbing. Several drivers reported encountering abandoned trucks at remote rest areas throughout Wyoming, Colorado, and Nebraska. In each case, the trucks were found running with their engines idling, but with no drivers present and no explanation for their abandonment. Most of these incidents had been reported to local law enforcement, but none had received the level of investigation that the mile marker 247 case had generated. A driver named Rex Garrison told me about finding a blue Freightliner at a rest area on Interstate 76 in Colorado, running and apparently abandoned, with tire tracks leading away from the parking area in an impossible direction. "Tracks led straight up a cliff face," Rex told me. "Not up a road or a path, but literally up a vertical rock wall where no vehicle could possibly travel. State police said it was probably an optical illusion or misidentified animal tracks, but I know what I saw." Another driver, Brock Castellanos, described a similar incident on Interstate 25 in northern Colorado. "Found a white Peterbilt at the rest area near the Wyoming border. Engine running, lights on, but no driver anywhere. Called the cops, but by the time they arrived, the truck was gone. Not driven away, gone. No tire tracks, no sign it had ever been there. The trooper thought I was having some kind of breakdown, but I know what I saw." The stories all followed a similar pattern. Trucks found abandoned at remote rest areas, usually late at night or early in the morning, always with their engines running and no sign of their drivers. In each case, there were tire tracks leading away from the rest area in directions that made no sense, up cliff faces, across rivers, through dense forests where no vehicle could travel. Most disturbing was the discovery that several long-haul truckers had been reported missing in the region over the past 2 years. Drivers who had simply vanished during routine runs, leaving no trace except abandoned trucks found at rest areas with their engines running and their cargo intact. Law enforcement had investigated each disappearance as a separate incident, but no one had recognized the pattern until I began connecting the dots. I shared my findings with Detective Morrison, who admitted that the Wyoming State Police had received similar reports but had not identified any connection between them. "We tend to treat each abandoned vehicle report as an isolated incident," he explained, "but what you're describing suggests there might be some kind of systematic pattern targeting truck drivers in remote locations." Detective Morrison agreed to coordinate with law enforcement agencies in neighboring states to compile a comprehensive database of abandoned truck incidents and missing driver reports. The results of that analysis were even more troubling than I had anticipated. Over the past 5 years, 47 long-haul truckers had disappeared while traveling through Wyoming, Colorado, Nebraska, and northern Kansas. In 32 of those cases, their trucks were found abandoned at rest areas with engines running and no sign of the drivers. The missing truckers represented a cross-section of the industry: experienced professionals with clean driving records, good safety ratings, and no history of personal problems that might explain voluntary disappearances. The pattern was clear once you knew to look for it, but it had been invisible to individual law enforcement agencies dealing with isolated cases. Someone or something was systematically targeting truck drivers at remote rest areas, and the disappearances were being covered up through elaborate deceptions involving false paperwork, fictitious companies, and impossible physical evidence. Detective Morrison organized a multi-state task force to investigate what was being called the phantom trucker cases. Federal agencies were brought in due to the interstate nature of the crimes, and specialized units began monitoring rest areas and truck stops throughout the region. But despite extensive resources and sophisticated surveillance techniques, no additional incidents were documented. It was as if whoever was responsible for the disappearances knew they were being watched and had suspended their activities until the law enforcement presence was reduced. The task force maintained operations for 6 months before being disbanded due to lack of new evidence or incidents. The 47 missing truckers remained missing, and no arrests were made. But I continued my own investigation, and 3 months after the task force was dissolved, I made a discovery that provided a partial explanation for what might have been happening at those remote rest areas. I was delivering a load of construction equipment from Denver to a job site near Gillette, Wyoming, when I decided to stop at the rest area at mile marker 247, where I'd first encountered the abandoned Kenworth. I don't know why I felt compelled to return to that location. Maybe it was curiosity, maybe it was some kind of unfinished business, or maybe I just wanted to prove to myself that it was just a normal rest area with no lingering mysteries. It was around 10 o'clock at night when I pulled into the rest area, and I was surprised to find it completely empty. No trucks, no cars, no RVs, just empty parking spaces and the soft glow of the few lampposts that illuminated the facility. I parked in the same spot where I'd been on that October morning when I'd discovered the missing driver, and I sat in my cab for a while, remembering the strange details of that encounter. That's when I noticed something I'd missed during my previous visits to the rest area. At the far end of the parking area, where the red Kenworth had been parked, the asphalt was newer than the rest of the pavement. It was subtle, the kind of detail you'd only notice if you were specifically looking for it, but there was definitely a section of roadway that had been recently resurfaced. I walked over to examine the area more closely and found evidence that extensive excavation had been done at that location. The new asphalt covered an area approximately the size of a truck parking space, and the edges didn't quite match the color and texture of the original pavement. Someone had dug up a significant portion of the parking area and then repaved it to cover up whatever had been done. Using a small flashlight, I examined the ground around the repaved section and found fragments of concrete and metal that appeared to be remnants of some kind of underground installation. The pieces were small and partially buried, but they suggested that there had been substantial construction work at this location, probably within the past year. I also discovered something even more significant. The tire tracks that had led away from the rest area toward the north were still faintly visible in the areas where the soil had been undisturbed by weather and erosion. Following those tracks in the daylight, I was able to trace them much farther than I had originally thought possible. The tracks led across approximately 2 miles of open prairie before ending at what appeared to be a natural depression in the landscape. But when I reached that location, I discovered that the depression wasn't natural at all. It was a carefully camouflaged access point to an underground facility. The camouflage was sophisticated, a retractable covering that looked like natural prairie grassland from a distance, but could be opened to reveal a vehicle ramp leading down into the earth. The edges of the covering were barely visible unless you knew exactly what to look for, and the hydraulic mechanisms that operated it were completely concealed beneath artificial rock formations. I didn't have the equipment or expertise to open the concealed entrance, but I was able to confirm that it was definitely some kind of underground access point large enough to accommodate commercial vehicles. The tire tracks led directly to the edge of the covering and disappeared, suggesting that vehicles regularly entered this facility and were then transported underground. I immediately called Detective Morrison and reported my discovery. Within hours, a team of federal agents and state police officers were on the scene with specialized equipment for investigating underground installations. What they found beneath the prairie was far more extensive than anyone had anticipated. The concealed entrance led to an underground facility that extended for several acres beneath the Wyoming rangeland. The installation included vehicle storage areas, living quarters, laboratory spaces, and what appeared to be holding cells designed to accommodate human prisoners. Most of the facility had been hastily abandoned, but enough equipment and documentation remained to provide clues about its purpose. According to the documents recovered from the facility, it had been operated by a private research organization that was conducting experiments on human subjects, specifically targeting individuals whose disappearances would be difficult to investigate or publicize. Long-haul truck drivers were ideal subjects because they often traveled alone, maintained irregular schedules, and might not be missed for weeks if they failed to return home on schedule. The research appeared to focus on stress response, isolation psychology, and what the documents described as reality perception modification. Test subjects were apparently kidnapped from remote rest areas and transported to the underground facility, where they were subjected to various forms of psychological and possibly physical experimentation. The method of operation was sophisticated and carefully planned. Research personnel would monitor truck traffic patterns and identify drivers who regularly used remote rest areas during overnight stops. They would then create elaborate scenarios designed to isolate individual drivers and make their disappearances appear to be voluntary abandonments or unexplained accidents. The red Kenworth I had encountered was apparently part of the operation, a specially modified vehicle used to create realistic scenarios that would attract the attention of target subjects. The driver I had seen was probably a member of the research team whose job was to establish the appearance of a normal trucking operation before disappearing in a way that would prompt investigation by other drivers. The tire tracks leading away from rest areas weren't made by conventional vehicles at all, but by specialized transport units designed to carry kidnapped subjects across terrain where normal vehicles couldn't travel. The tracks led to concealed access points like the one I had discovered, where subjects could be transferred to underground facilities without leaving traces that conventional law enforcement could follow. Federal agents found evidence that similar facilities existed in at least 6 other states, all connected by underground transportation networks that allowed the research organization to move subjects and personnel without detection by surface surveillance. The scope of the operation was far larger than the 47 missing truckers that had been documented in the Wyoming area. The investigation revealed that over 200 people had disappeared over the past decade, including not just truck drivers, but also traveling salespeople, RV tourists, and other individuals who fit the profile of isolated travelers whose absence might not be immediately noticed. The research organization had been operating with apparently unlimited funding and resources, suggesting connections to either government agencies or extremely wealthy private entities. Most of the disappeared subjects were never found, and federal investigators believe they were either killed after the experiments were completed or transported to other facilities outside the United States. The few surviving victims who were located during raids on the underground installations were too traumatized to provide coherent testimony about their experiences. The research organization itself proved impossible to trace. All documentation used code names and numerical designations rather than real identities, and the financial records led to shell companies and offshore accounts that had been dissolved before investigators could access them. Whoever was behind the operation had planned for eventual discovery and had implemented procedures for completely disappearing when law enforcement got too close. The underground facility beneath the Wyoming prairie was sealed and classified by federal authorities, and most details about the investigation were never released to the public. The families of the missing truckers were notified that their loved ones had been victims of criminal activity, but they were given no specifics about what had happened or whether the perpetrators would ever be brought to justice. Detective Morrison was reassigned to other cases, and the multi-state task force was quietly disbanded with no public announcement about its findings. The rest area at mile marker 247 was closed for several months for what the Wyoming Department of Transportation described as routine maintenance and safety improvements. When it reopened, the parking area had been completely reconstructed, and additional security lighting had been installed. I continued driving truck for another 2 years after the investigation concluded, but I was never comfortable stopping at remote rest areas, especially during overnight hours. The knowledge that such an extensive criminal operation had been targeting truck drivers changed the way I approached every aspect of the job. I started carrying additional communication equipment, checked in more frequently with dispatchers and family members, and avoided any delivery contracts that seemed unusual or paid significantly more than standard rates. Other drivers in the industry were never officially informed about the research organization or the disappearances, but word spread through the trucking community anyway. Rest area usage dropped significantly in Wyoming and neighboring states, and many drivers began traveling in informal convoys for protection. The CB radio networks buzzed with rumors and speculation about what had really happened to the missing truckers, but no official statements were ever made. 3 years after the investigation, I received a call from someone claiming to be Detective Morrison, but when I tried to verify the call through the Wyoming State Police, I was told that no one by that name had ever worked for the department. The caller had detailed knowledge about the mile marker 247 case and the underground facility, but he also claimed that the investigation had uncovered evidence of additional research operations that were still active. They shut down the Wyoming facility, but they didn't shut down the program, the caller told me. There are still disappearances happening, still research being conducted, just in different locations using different methods. The people behind this operation have unlimited resources and connections that reach into every level of government. They're not going to stop because we found one facility. The caller warned me that some of the subjects who had been recovered from the research facilities might not actually be the original missing persons, but rather artificially created duplicates designed to provide false closure to the investigation. How do you verify someone's identity when the people doing the verification might be part of the conspiracy? He asked. How do you know that the person who comes back is the same person who disappeared? I never heard from the mysterious caller again, but his warnings stayed with me. The trucking industry returned to something like normal operations, but I couldn't shake the feeling that the disappearances hadn't really stopped, just changed form. Every abandoned vehicle report, every missing driver case, every unusual incident at a remote rest area made me wonder if the research organization was still operating somewhere in the shadows of the American highway system. I eventually retired from long-haul trucking and took a job with a local delivery company that keeps me close to home. But I still monitor the CB radio networks and online forums where drivers share information about road conditions and unusual encounters. And I still hear stories that sound disturbingly familiar. Trucks found abandoned with their engines running, drivers who disappear without explanation, tire tracks that lead nowhere. The official story is that the research organization was identified and dismantled, and that the disappearances were the work of a criminal network that has been eliminated. But I know better. I know that there are forces operating in the empty spaces between our cities and towns, in the remote rest areas and isolated truck stops where drivers are most vulnerable, that have resources and capabilities far beyond anything most people can imagine. Every time a trucker fails to check in on schedule, every time an abandoned truck is found at a remote location, every time someone reports seeing strange lights or hearing unusual sounds in the middle of the night on a lonely highway, I wonder if the research organization has simply adapted their methods and continued their work. The highway system that connects our country also provides perfect cover for operations that need to move people and resources without detection. The millions of commercial vehicles that travel our roads every day create a vast network of potential targets and unwitting accomplices. And the isolation that comes with long-haul trucking, the hours spent alone on empty roads, the stops at remote locations, the irregular schedules that make it difficult to track someone's whereabouts, provides ideal conditions for the kind of criminal activity that the research organization specialized in. I've shared my story with other drivers, hoping to warn them about the potential dangers of accepting unusual loads or stopping at unfamiliar rest areas. But most people in the trucking industry are focused on making a living and getting their freight delivered on time. They don't want to hear about elaborate conspiracy theories or underground research facilities. They want to believe that the road is safe and predictable, that following the rules and maintaining their equipment will protect them from harm. Maybe they're right. Maybe the research organization really was eliminated, and the disappearances were just an unfortunate chapter in the history of American trucking. Maybe the strange incidents that still get reported are just coincidences or misunderstandings, not evidence of ongoing criminal activity. But every time I drive past the rest area at mile marker 247, I remember that October morning when I found the red Kenworth with its engine running and its driver gone. And I know that there are things happening on our highways that most people will never understand or acknowledge. The road holds secrets that go far beyond anything most drivers will ever encounter. But those secrets are always there, waiting in the empty spaces between destinations, in the hours when most of America is asleep, and the highways belong to the few of us who make our living moving freight across the darkness. The tire tracks that led away from that rest area are gone now, erased by weather and time and the deliberate efforts of people who didn't want them to be found. But I remember exactly where they pointed, and I know that somewhere out there, beyond the reach of normal investigation and conventional understanding, there are answers to questions that most people are afraid to ask. And sometimes, late at night when I'm driving through remote country with nothing but empty highway stretching ahead of me, I wonder if I'm being watched by people who remember that I was the one who found their carefully constructed scenario and started the investigation that led to the discovery of their underground facility. I wonder if they're planning to finish what they started, to complete the research project that was interrupted when law enforcement got too close. I keep my CB radio tuned to Channel 19, listening for other drivers who might need help or who might have information about unusual encounters on the road. And I watch my mirrors constantly, looking for vehicles that stay behind me too long or follow patterns that seem more deliberate than coincidental. Because I know that somewhere in the vast network of highways that connect our country, there are people conducting experiments that most of us can't imagine, using methods that challenge our understanding of what's possible, targeting individuals whose disappearances can be explained away or covered up. And I know that the only protection any of us has is staying alert, staying connected with other drivers, and never assuming that what appears normal on the surface is actually what it seems to be. The research organization that operated the facility beneath the Wyoming prairie may have been shut down, but the infrastructure they created, the underground installations, the specialized equipment, the networks of shell companies and false identities, didn't disappear when federal agents raided their facilities. Someone else could be using those resources now, continuing the research with different methods and different targets. The American highway system spans over 4 million miles of roadway, connecting every corner of our country through a network that's so vast and complex that no single agency can monitor all of it effectively. In that network, there are thousands of remote locations where someone could disappear without a trace, thousands of rest areas and truck stops where criminal activity could take place without witnesses, and millions of commercial vehicles that could be used to transport people and equipment without detection. And there are drivers like me who've seen things that challenge our understanding of how the world works. who've encountered evidence of operations that exist in the shadows of legitimate commerce, who know that the road holds dangers that go far beyond mechanical failures and bad weather. We're out here every night, moving freight across the darkness, watching for other drivers who might need help, listening for radio transmissions that might provide warnings about road conditions or unusual activity. We're the ones who see the abandoned vehicles, who find the evidence that law enforcement agencies struggle to explain, who encounter the situations that don't fit normal patterns of criminal activity or mechanical problems. And we're the ones who remember the drivers who disappear, who notice when familiar voices stop appearing on the CB radio networks, who ask questions when trucks are found abandoned with their engines running and no explanation for where their operators have gone. The mile marker 247 rest area looks normal now. The parking area has been repaved, the lighting has been improved, and there's no visible evidence of the excavation work that revealed the underground access point. Travelers who stop there probably never realize that they're parking in a location where 47 people disappeared over a 5-year period, or that beneath their feet lies evidence of criminal activity that challenged everything law enforcement thought they knew about organized crime and human trafficking. But I remember, and I know that there are other drivers who remember similar encounters at other locations, other rest areas where things happened that couldn't be explained by conventional understanding of criminal activity or mechanical problems. The research organization might be gone, but the questions they were trying to answer, questions about human psychology, about stress response, about the limits of perception and reality, those questions haven't gone away. Someone else might be seeking those same answers, using the same methods, targeting the same vulnerable populations, and the infrastructure that made their operation possible, the vast network of highways and rest areas, the millions of commercial vehicles moving freight across isolated terrain, the community of professional drivers who operate according to predictable patterns and schedules. That infrastructure is still there, still providing opportunities for criminal activity that most people never consider. Every time I hear about an abandoned truck or a missing driver, every time someone reports unusual activity at a remote rest area, every time the CB radio carries transmissions that don't quite make sense in the context of normal trucking operations, I wonder if the research organization has found new ways to continue their work. Because I know that the people behind that operation had resources and capabilities that went far beyond anything most criminal organizations possess. They had underground facilities, specialized transportation equipment, sophisticated methods for creating false identities and cover stories, and connections that reached into law enforcement and government agencies. Those resources didn't disappear when their Wyoming facility was discovered. The tire tracks that led away from the red Kenworth might have been erased by time and weather, but somewhere out there, new tracks are being made by people who learned from the mistakes that led to the discovery of the underground facility. New rest areas are being selected as locations for operations that most people will never understand or acknowledge. New drivers are being targeted by methods that have been refined and improved based on the lessons learned from the Wyoming investigation. And new questions are being asked about human psychology and perception, questions that can only be answered through experiments that most people would consider unthinkable, using test subjects whose disappearances can be explained away as voluntary abandonments or unexplained accidents. The road never sleeps. Somewhere in America tonight, there are drivers moving freight across empty highways, stopping at remote rest areas, making the kinds of routine decisions that have become second nature after years of professional trucking. Most of them will complete their trips safely and return home to their families without ever realizing how close they might have come to disappearing into a world that exists in the shadows of legitimate commerce. But some of them might encounter something that challenges their understanding of how the world works. Some of them might find abandoned vehicles with their engines running and no sign of their operators. Some of them might notice tire tracks leading away from rest areas in directions that make no sense according to normal logic and understanding. And if they're smart, they'll call law enforcement immediately. They'll document everything they've seen. They'll stay connected with other drivers through their CB radios, and they'll remember that the road holds secrets that most people are afraid to acknowledge. Because the research organization that operated beneath the Wyoming prairie might be gone, but the questions they were trying to answer are still out there, waiting for someone else with unlimited resources and criminal intent to continue the work that was interrupted by federal investigation. The highways that connect our country also provide perfect cover for operations that need to move people and equipment without detection. The millions of commercial vehicles that travel those highways create opportunities for criminal activity that most law enforcement agencies aren't equipped to recognize or investigate. And the drivers who operate those vehicles are often isolated, vulnerable, and operating according to patterns that make them ideal targets for the kind of research that the Wyoming organization specialized in. I've been off the road for 5 years now, but I still monitor the CB radio networks and online forums where drivers share information about unusual encounters and road conditions. I still hear stories that sound disturbingly familiar, reports of abandoned trucks and missing drivers and tire tracks that lead nowhere. And I still wonder if the investigation that began with my discovery of the red Kenworth at mile marker 247 really ended the threat, or just forced it to adapt and continue in forms that are harder to detect and investigate. The truth is that we'll probably never know the full extent of what the research organization was trying to accomplish, or whether their work continues in other locations using different methods. The questions they were asking about human psychology and perception are legitimate scientific inquiries that could be pursued through conventional research methods by universities and government agencies. But the methods they used, kidnapping subjects from remote locations, conducting experiments without consent, disposing of subjects who were no longer useful for research purposes, those methods represent criminal activity of the most serious kind, and the infrastructure they created to support those methods, underground facilities, specialized transportation equipment, networks of false identities and shell companies, could be used by other organizations for similar purposes. The American highway system will always provide opportunities for criminal activity that operates in the spaces between conventional law enforcement jurisdictions. The millions of people who travel our roads every day create a vast population of potential victims whose movements are difficult to track and whose disappearances might not be noticed immediately. And there will always be drivers like me who encounter things on the road that challenge our understanding of what's normal and predictable, who find evidence of operations that exist in the shadows of legitimate commerce, who ask questions that most people prefer not to consider. The mile marker 247 rest area is just one location in a network of highways that spans the entire continent. What happened there might have been unique in its scope and sophistication, but the basic vulnerability that made it possible, the isolation of long-haul truckers, and the difficulty of monitoring activity at remote locations, exists everywhere in the American transportation system. The red Kenworth with its missing driver was just one incident in what might have been a much larger pattern of criminal activity. The tire tracks that led away from that rest area toward an underground facility might have been just one example of transportation methods that most people never imagined could exist. And the 47 missing truckers who disappeared over a 5-year period in Wyoming and neighboring states might represent just a fraction of the total number of people who have become victims of research operations that most of us are afraid to acknowledge or investigate. The road goes on forever, connecting destinations across a continent, carrying millions of people and billions of tons of freight through landscapes that most Americans never see except through the windows of passing vehicles. In that vast network of highways and rest areas and truck stops, there are infinite opportunities for things to happen that challenge our understanding of what's possible and what's safe to assume about the world around us. And there are drivers out there right now moving through the darkness with loads that need to be delivered and schedules that need to be maintained, who might encounter something that will change their understanding of what really happens on America's highways when most people are asleep, and the road belongs to the few of us who make our living moving freight across the empty spaces between cities. I hope they're more careful than I was that October morning when I decided to check on what appeared to be a fellow trucker in distress. I hope they trust their instincts when something doesn't feel right. And I hope they remember that in the world of long-haul trucking, the most dangerous assumption you can make is that what appears normal on the surface is actually what it seems to be. Because somewhere out there, in the vast network of highways that connect our country, there are people conducting operations that most of us can't imagine, using methods that challenge our understanding of what's possible, targeting individuals whose disappearances can be explained away or covered up by the very isolation that makes long-haul trucking both necessary and dangerous. The tire tracks that led away from mile marker 247 are gone now, but they pointed toward truths that most people are afraid to acknowledge. And until we're willing to ask the hard questions about what really happens on our highways in the hours when America is asleep, those truths will continue to exist in the shadows of legitimate commerce, waiting for the next driver who makes the mistake of assuming that an abandoned truck with its engine running is just another routine problem that can be solved with a simple phone call to law enforcement. The road never sleeps, and neither do the people who use it for purposes that most of us prefer not to think about. That's why I'm telling you this story. Not because I expect you to believe every detail, but because I want other drivers to understand that the road holds dangers that go beyond mechanical failures and bad weather. I want them to know that there are operations targeting truckers that use methods most people can't imagine, and that the only protection any of us has is staying alert, staying connected with other drivers, and never assuming that what we encounter on the highway is necessarily what it appears to be. The red Kenworth at mile marker 247 taught me that lesson in a way I'll never forget. And I hope that sharing that lesson with other drivers might prevent someone else from making the same assumptions that could have gotten me killed or disappeared like the 47 other truckers who weren't lucky enough to encounter a situation that led to investigation instead of victimization. Because out there on America's highways, in the hours when most people are asleep and the road belongs to those of us who move freight across the darkness, anything is possible, and not all of it is good.